Welcome to World of Sleepcraft. Tonight we explore the complete story of the Naaru, those beings of pure crystalline light who were born from the primordial cosmos and have guided the fate of worlds, including Azeroth, across countless ages. Before there was time, before there were stars or worlds, or the faintest whisper of life, there existed only the light. This was not light as mortals understand it, not the gentle glow of a candle or the warm rays of a sun. This was something far more fundamental, a boundless sea of living energy that swelled across all of existence, unfettered by the constraints of time and space. The light simply was, filling every corner of what would one day become the cosmos with its radiant presence. But the light was not alone for long. From the spaces between its luminous waves, from the shadows that even infinite radiance cannot fully banish, emerged the void. This was the light's opposite in every way, a dark and vampiric force driven by an insatiable hunger to devour all energy, to twist creation inward upon itself until nothing remained but endless, consuming darkness. Where the light represented hope and possibility, the void embodied entropy and despair. These two primordial forces existed in a state of growing tension, each pressing against the other across the formless expanse of pre-creation. The light sought to expand, to fill every corner of existence with its nurturing warmth. The void sought to consume, to draw all things into its hungry embrace. Neither could overcome the other, and neither could exist in peace alongside its opposite. The pressure built across eons that had no meaning, time having not yet begun its march. Eventually, the tension between light and void reached a breaking point. The collision of these opposing forces ignited a series of cosmic explosions, so vast and so powerful that they gave birth to reality itself. The physical universe burst into existence in a cataclysm of energy and matter, the great dark beyond expanding outward from that primordial moment of creation. Stars blazed into existence, planets coalesced from clouds of cosmic dust. The framework upon which all of existence would be built was laid down in those first moments of creation. The cataclysmic birth of the cosmos sent shards of fractured light flying through the newly formed universe. These fragments of primordial radiance suffused the newly formed planets with the spark of life, seeding the potential for growth and evolution across countless worlds. But the light's influence did not end with these scattered fragments. Occasionally, shards of light would gather together in the great dark beyond, drawn to one another by some attraction that defied physical explanation. These gathering shards would form clouds of concentrated radiance, swirling vortexes of holy energy that pulsed with the heartbeat of creation itself. From these clouds of light, powerful beings began to emerge. These were the Naaru, entities of pure, living energy who embodied the light's benevolent nature. They were not created in the way that mortals understand creation, not shaped by hands or born from parents. They simply coalesced from the radiant clouds, individual consciousnesses forming within the swirling light until they became aware of themselves as distinct beings. The process of their emergence remains mysterious, even to those who have studied them for millennia, for the Naaru themselves speak little of their origins, and what they do share is often couched in metaphor and symbolism. The first Naaru to emerge from these clouds of light were known as the Prime Naaru, beings of tremendous power and ancient wisdom. Xe'ra, who would later play a crucial role in the war against the Burning Legion, claimed to be one of the first Naaru to be forged during the Great Ordering of the Cosmos. She described herself as an elder Naaru, possibly the eldest remaining in the universe, by the time she encountered the mortal races. If her claims were true, the Prime Naaru had existed since the earliest moments following creation, making them among the oldest conscious beings in all of reality. When the Naaru first gazed out across the newly formed universe, they saw limitless possibilities spread before them. Worlds beyond counting waited to be touched by the light's warmth. Life in all its forms struggled to survive and flourish in the harsh conditions of the young cosmos. The Naaru could have remained apart from these mortal concerns, existing in peaceful contemplation of their own radiance. But that was not their nature. They vowed to use their mastery over holy magic to nurture life and hope throughout the cosmos, to stand as guardians against the forces of darkness that sought to corrupt and destroy. This vow would define the Naaru for all the ages that followed. They became the angels of the Warcraft universe, beings who devoted their existence to the protection of life and the advancement of hope. They traveled across the great dark beyond, visiting world after world, offering guidance and aid to the mortal races who struggled against the darkness. Some worlds, they found, had already fallen to corruption, consumed by the void or ravaged by demons. Others they found untouched, their inhabitants unaware of the cosmic forces that might one day threaten them. To all of them, the Naaru brought the same message. The light was real, hope was possible, and even the darkest night would eventually give way to dawn. The word Naaru itself carries meaning that hints at their nature. In Babylonian, the word Naaru means river god, while Nuru or Nuru means light. This etymology is fitting for beings who flow through the cosmos like rivers of radiance, bringing the light's blessing wherever they travel. The comparison to rivers is apt in another way as well, for just as rivers can nurture life, but also flood and destroy, the Naaru possess a duality that makes them both creators and destroyers depending on circumstances. The Naaru's relationship to the cosmic order became clearer with the revelation of the cosmology that underlies the Warcraft universe. In this understanding of reality, 6 fundamental forces shape all of existence: light, void, life, death, order, and disorder. The light is one of these primal forces, existing in eternal opposition to the void. The Naaru are the light's champions in this cosmic struggle, just as the Void Lords and their servants are the void's champions. The conflict between these forces predates the physical universe and will continue long after any particular world or civilization has crumbled to dust. Each of these cosmic forces has its own realm of power, its own domain from which it draws strength and to which it seeks to expand. The light emanates from a realm of pure radiance, a dimension where shadow cannot exist and where all things bask in eternal warmth. The Naaru are connected to this realm in ways that mortals cannot fully comprehend, drawing upon its infinite reserves of holy energy to fuel their existence and their mission. When a Naaru channels the light's power, it is tapping into this cosmic wellspring, acting as a conduit between the realm of radiance and the physical universe. The realm of light is not simply a passive reservoir of energy. It has its own character, its own tendencies, its own preferences about how the universe should be ordered. The light favors growth, healing, and unity. It seeks to gather all things together, to bring disparate elements into harmony, to create connections where none existed before. This tendency can be benevolent, as when the light heals wounds or strengthens bonds between allies. But it can also be oppressive, as when it seeks to impose its vision of order upon those who would prefer to remain independent. The light does not always respect boundaries, does not always understand that some souls wish to chart their own course rather than be gathered into a greater whole. This aspect of the light's nature explains much about the Naaru's behavior throughout history. They genuinely believe that they are acting for the good of all when they guide mortal races toward the light's embrace. They cannot fully comprehend why anyone would reject the warmth and unity that the light offers. When xe'ra attempted to forcibly infuse Illidan with holy energy, she was not acting out of malice, but out of a sincere conviction that she was giving him a gift beyond measure. Her failure to understand why he might refuse this gift was not a personal failing, but a reflection of the light's own limitations, its inability to truly understand perspectives that differ from its own. The Void Lords, those entities of absolute darkness who dwell in the realm of shadow, sought to corrupt world souls before they could awaken as titans. They sent the old gods across the cosmos to infest nascent worlds, hoping to create a dark titan that could destroy all of creation. The Naaru stood against this corruption wherever they found it, purifying worlds that had been touched by the void's influence and battling the creatures that served the darkness. This cosmic war has raged since the dawn of time and shows no signs of ending. Some servants of the void regard the Naaru with a strange mixture of contempt and longing. They speak of the Naaru as beloved brethren who have lost the true path, beings who will eventually return to the embrace of the void. This perspective suggests that the void sees the Naaru not as enemies to be destroyed, but as wayward children to be reclaimed. Whether this view has any basis in reality or is merely the delusion of the corrupted remains unclear, but it adds another layer of complexity to the relationship between these opposing forces. The existence of the Naaru has led some scholars to speculate about beings that might serve as their void counterparts. If the light has champions in the form of the Naaru, logic would suggest that the void might have similar champions. Some have proposed the existence of light lords who rule over the realm of light, just as the void lords rule over shadow. These theoretical beings would be the ultimate source of the Naaru's power and purpose, the architects of the cosmic plan that the Naaru strive to fulfill. No definitive evidence for such beings has ever been found, but the symmetry of the cosmos suggests that they might exist. The Naaru's opposition to the Burning Legion deserves special attention, for this conflict has shaped much of their activity throughout recorded history. The Legion, though powered primarily by FL energy, represents a force of destruction that threatens all life in the universe. The demons that serve Sargeras seek not merely to conquer, but to annihilate, to reduce all of creation to ash and cinder. This goal places them in direct opposition to everything the Naaru stand for. Yet the relationship between the Naaru and the Legion is more complex than simple enmity might suggest. Sargeras himself was once a champion of order, a titan who fought to protect creation from the darkness of the void. His fall came precisely because he despaired of ever defeating the Void Lords, coming to believe that a universe destroyed would be preferable to a universe corrupted. In a twisted way, Sargeras shares the Naaru's goal of opposing the void. He simply pursues that goal through means that the Naaru find utterly abhorrent. Some scholars have speculated that the Naaru might have intervened to prevent Sargeras's fall, might have reached out to the despairing Titan and offered him hope when he saw only darkness. Whether such an intervention was attempted and failed, or was never attempted at all, remains unknown. What is certain is that by the time the Naaru became aware of the Legion's threat, Sargeras had already committed himself to the path of destruction. There was no possibility of redemption, only the necessity of opposition. The Naaru's war against the Legion has been waged across countless worlds over countless millennia. They have won victories and suffered defeats, saved civilizations, and watched helplessly as others fell. They have lost many of their number in the conflict, their crystalline forms shattered by demonic weapons or corrupted by fell energies. Yet they have never wavered in their commitment to opposing the Legion's dark crusade. For the Naaru, surrender is not an option, for to surrender would be to betray everything they have ever believed in. The Legion's eventual defeat at the hands of the forces of Azeroth, with significant Naaru assistance, marked a turning point in this eternal conflict. Sargeras was imprisoned by his fellow Titans, his armies scattered, his lieutenants slain or scattered. For the first time in ages, the Naaru could contemplate a universe free from the Legion's threat. But this victory was bittersweet, for it came at tremendous cost, and the Naaru knew that other threats still lurked in the darkness, waiting for their moment to strike. The Naaru are beings unlike anything else in the cosmos, and understanding their nature is essential to understanding their role in the great events that have shaped the universe. They lack physical flesh in the way that mortals possess it. Their forms are luminous and shifting, composed of crystalline structures that pulse with holy energy. When one looks upon a Naaru, one sees patterns of light, weaving through geometric shapes, a constantly moving display of radiance that seems to shift and flow like water made of starlight. Some observers have compared the experience to gazing into the heart of a sun, though a sun that somehow does not blind or burn. The Naaru communicate telepathically, projecting their thoughts and emotions directly into the minds of those they wish to address. This form of communication transcends the barriers of language, allowing the Naaru to speak with beings from any world, regardless of what tongue they speak or what form their thoughts might take. When a Naaru communicates, the recipient often experiences not just words, but emotions, impressions, and sometimes even visions. The experience has been described as overwhelming by those who have undergone it, a flood of meaning that can be difficult for mortal minds to fully process. Each Naaru possesses its own distinct personality, its own goals and motivations, its own understanding of how best to serve the light. This individuality was something that many mortals failed to recognize, assuming that all Naaru shared a single purpose and a single will. The reality was far more complex. Adal, the Naaru who led the Shaitar in Shatrath City, was known for his gentle demeanor and strategic wisdom. xe'ra, the prime Naaru who commanded the Army of the Light, was far more militant and certain in her convictions. Muru possessed a selfless nature that led him to willing sacrifice. These were not interchangeable beings, but individuals, each shaped by their own experiences and choices across the ages. The Naaru are apparently immortal, or at least possess a form of existence that approaches immortality as mortals understand it. They have existed since the dawn of creation and show no signs of aging or natural death. Yet they are not invulnerable. They can be harmed, their energies drained or corrupted, their crystalline forms shattered. Many Naaru have fallen in the endless war against the forces of darkness, their light extinguished in battles that have raged across countless worlds. The loss of each Naaru is felt keenly by those who remain, for while new Naaru may emerge from the clouds of light that still form in the great dark beyond, each individual Naaru is irreplaceable. Their unique perspective and accumulated wisdom lost forever when they are destroyed, though the Naaru have not been officially classified as gods. They possess many of the attributes that mortals associate with divinity. They are beings of tremendous power, capable of feats that seem miraculous to those who witness them. They possess wisdom accumulated over ages beyond mortal comprehension. They show an altruistic nature that seems to transcend personal interest, dedicating themselves to the welfare of others without expectation of reward. Some mortal cultures have worshipped the Naaru as divine beings, building temples in their honor and offering prayers to specific Naaru who have aided them. While worshippers typically revere the holy light itself as a concept, some still seek individual blessings from particular Naaru. Adal is associated with fortitude, Dore with healing, Ka'ara with accuracy in times of war, and Kyure with swiftness. The physical manifestation of a Naaru is awe-inspiring to behold. Adal, who served as leader of the Shatar in Shatrath city, was described as shimmering like a chained sun. Witnesses reported that if his power were ever fully unleashed, it might destroy cities or topple mountains. Yet despite this tremendous power, Adal ruled Shatrath with a gentle demeanor, preferring persuasion and inspiration to displays of force. This combination of immense power and restraint was characteristic of many Naaru, beings who could reshape worlds but chose instead to guide and nurture. The Naaru lack what mortals would consider proper attack animations in their natural state. When forced to fight, they spin their crystalline forms to face their opponents, channeling holy energy through their structures to smite their enemies. Their preferred attacks are magical in nature, bolts and waves of light that can purify corruption or destroy demons. Yet they are also capable of physical strikes when necessary, their crystalline edges sharp enough to wound even the most heavily armored foes. Lura, a Naaru encountered on Argus, was notable for being the first Naaru to display distinct attack and death animations, a grim acknowledgement that even these beings of light could fall in battle. Perhaps most importantly, the Naaru are not common knowledge to the average citizen of Azeroth. While adventurers who have traveled to Outland or participated in the war against the Legion have encountered these beings of light, ordinary people living in Stormwind or Orgrimmar may have never heard of them. The Naaru remain somewhat mysterious even to those who have interacted with them directly, their true nature and ultimate goals often obscured behind layers of prophecy and cosmic purpose. This mystery is not entirely unintentional, for the Naaru seem to understand that some truths are too vast for mortal minds to fully comprehend. The Naaru's choice to remain somewhat aloof from mortal affairs reflects a deeper wisdom about the nature of growth and development. They understand that mortals must face their own challenges, make their own mistakes, and find their own paths to enlightenment. A parent who does everything for a child produces a helpless adult. A teacher who gives all the answers produces a student who cannot think. The Naaru have learned through long experience that their role is to guide and inspire, not to control and direct. They offer the light's blessing to all who seek it, but they do not force that blessing upon the unwilling. This philosophy has sometimes led to tragedy. There have been worlds that the Naaru might have saved had they intervened more directly, civilizations that fell to darkness because the Naaru waited too long to act. The Naaru carry the memory of these failures with them, the knowledge that their restraint has sometimes cost lives that more decisive action might have preserved. Yet they continue to hold back, believing that the long-term cost of making mortals dependent upon Naaru intervention would be greater than the short-term cost of allowing some tragedies to unfold. The Naaru's telepathic communication goes beyond mere words. When a Naaru speaks to a mortal, it conveys not just information, but emotional states, sensory impressions, and sometimes entire lifetimes of experience, compressed into moments of shared consciousness. Some mortals find this form of communication overwhelming, their minds unable to process the flood of meaning that pours through the connection. Others find it transformative, their understanding of the universe expanded by the glimpse they receive of a Naaru's perspective. The experience varies, depending on the mortal's own spiritual development and their capacity to receive what the Naaru offers. Priests who serve the light often describe moments of communion with forces greater than themselves, instances when their prayers seem to be answered by something vast and benevolent. Some of these experiences may be direct contact with Naaru, moments when the crystalline beings choose to reach out and touch a mortal soul. Other experiences may be connection with the realm of light itself, contact with the cosmic force that the Naaru serve, rather than with any individual Naaru. The distinction is difficult for mortals to perceive, and the Naaru themselves may not always clarify which form of contact is occurring. The Naaru's healing abilities deserve particular mention, for they represent one of the most tangible ways in which these beings interact with mortals. A Naaru can restore flesh that has been torn, mend bones that have been shattered, purify diseases that would otherwise prove fatal. Their healing power operates on a level beyond mundane medicine, addressing not just physical damage, but spiritual wounds as well. Mortals who have been healed by Naaru often report feeling a profound sense of peace and renewal, as if the healing extended to parts of themselves they had not even known were damaged. This healing power has its limits, however. The Naaru cannot restore life to those who have truly died, cannot undo deaths that have already occurred. They can save those who hover on the brink, can pull mortals back from the edge of oblivion, but once the soul has departed, even the Naaru's power cannot call it back. This limitation has caused tremendous grief at times, when the Naaru arrived moments too late to save someone who might otherwise have been saved. The Naaru also possess the power to purify corruption, to drive out demonic influence, and cleanse tainted souls. This ability proved crucial during the war against the Burning Legion, when many mortals fell under demonic sway and needed to be freed from that control. The process was not always gentle. To purify corruption, often meant to burn away parts of the corrupted individual, to destroy the tainted elements so that the pure might survive. Some mortals did not survive the purification process, their corruption having grown too deep to be removed without destroying them entirely. The power to create and empower other beings is another aspect of Naaru capability. The light-forged transformation was the most dramatic example of this, but it was not the only one. The Naaru could grant permanent blessings to those they favored, enhancing their abilities or protecting them from harm. These blessings were not given lightly, for they represented a commitment of the Naaru's own energy, a portion of their power invested in the blessed mortal. The Naaru chose carefully who would receive such gifts, for a blessing given to one unworthy could be twisted to dark purposes. The most unsettling aspect of the Naaru's nature is their connection to the very force they oppose. Despite being beings of pure light, the Naaru carry within themselves the potential for void. This duality is not a corruption or a flaw, but an intrinsic part of their existence, woven into the very fabric of their being since their creation. The Naaru live in a cycle of light and void, and understanding this cycle is essential to understanding the sacrifices and tragedies that have marked their history. When a Naaru is physically damaged or drained of its energy, it does not simply weaken and recover as a mortal might. Instead, the Naaru bleeds energy, its radiant light seeping away until it enters what is known as a void state. In this darkened condition, the Naaru's crystalline form loses its luminous quality, becoming dark and shadowed. The holy energies that once filled it are replaced by void energy, and the Naaru's very nature seems to invert. Where once it nurtured and healed, it now consumes and corrupts. Blizzard Entertainment has stated that it is exceedingly rare for a Naaru to fall into this void state, and that such an occurrence represents a catastrophic loss for the Naaru and for the forces of the light. It is described as the saddest, most heart-wrenching event for other Naaru to witness. Yet the game's storytelling has somewhat complicated this claim. The alternate version of Velen described Kara's darkened state as a stage of the Naaru life cycle, suggesting that the transition between light and void might be more natural than the official statements imply. A different interpretation holds that Naaru do naturally and regularly fall into a darkened state, in a manner similar to a phoenix becoming an egg, and return to the light after a time measured in millennia rather than mortal years. What happens when a Naaru enters its void state varies depending on circumstances. Left to its own devices, a darkened Naaru will slowly regenerate over thousands of years, eventually returning to its light-filled state. The light still exists within the Naaru, even when it is darkened, a spark of radiance buried deep within the void energies that now dominate its form. Given enough time and proper conditions, this spark can grow, pushing back the darkness until the Naaru is restored to its original nature. Kur was nearly at the end of this regeneration process when last seen, and the alternate Kara had her restoration accelerated to completion by the alternate version of Velen. But a darkened Naaru is vulnerable in ways that a Naaru filled with light is not. During the void state, the Naaru's weakened condition can be exploited by those who seek to use its power for their own ends. If a Naaru is physically attacked while in its void state, it can evolve into a creature wholly comprised of the void, a void god that represents the complete corruption of everything the Naaru once stood for. This void god can be killed just like any other creature of darkness, and when it dies, all that remains is the heart of the Naaru, a tiny spark of light that still beats with the energy of creation. The Naaru are aware of this dual nature and the dangers it poses. Dori, speaking while in a void state, acknowledged that there was nothing that could be done to stop the cycle. It was simply part of the Naaru condition. The Naaru openly recognized that without the void, the light could not exist, just as without darkness, there could be no understanding of what light truly means. This philosophical acceptance of their own duality set the Naaru apart from many of the light's other champions, who often viewed the void as purely evil rather than as a necessary counterbalancing force. The most tragic example of this cycle was Muru, a Naaru who was captured by the Blood Elves and drained of his power in Silver Moon City. Muru knew what would happen to him when Prince Kael'thas took him captive. He understood that he would be drained, that he would enter a void state, and that his power would be used to fuel the Blood Elves' addiction to magic. Yet he went willingly, accepting his fate because he believed that his sacrifice might lead to a greater good. The Blood Elves who drained him did not understand what they were doing, did not realize that they were pushing a being of pure light toward transformation into something far more dangerous. The tragedy of Muru illustrates a fundamental truth about the Naaru. Their greatest strength can also be their greatest vulnerability. Because they are beings of pure light, they serve as ideal targets for those who hunger for holy energy. The Blood Elves discovered that they could siphon Muru's power directly, using it to fuel their Blood Knights and satisfy their desperate craving for magical sustenance. What they did not understand was that every drop of energy they stole brought Muru closer to transformation, hastening the very corruption they would later be forced to confront. The question of whether Muru was complicit in his own capture has been debated by scholars and priests alike. Some argue that he allowed himself to be taken because he foresaw the redemption that would eventually result from his sacrifice. Others suggest that he simply could not resist the forces arrayed against him, that his willing acceptance was a rationalization after the fact. The truth, as with many aspects of the Naaru's nature, remains ambiguous. What is certain is that Muru's sacrifice ultimately led to the restoration of the Sunwell and the redemption of many Blood Elves who had strayed from the path of the light. The philosophical implications of Muru's choice, if choice it truly was, extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of his capture. The Naaru operate on a timescale that mortals can barely comprehend, seeing threads of causality that extend across millennia. What appears to mortals as random chance or cruel fate may be, from a Naaru's perspective, a carefully orchestrated series of events leading toward an ultimate good. This does not diminish the suffering involved, does not make the pain any less real for those who endure it, but it suggests that the Naaru may perceive meaning in tragedy that escapes mortal understanding. This cosmic perspective has implications for how the Naaru view mortal lives. To a being who has existed since the dawn of creation, a mortal lifespan is the blink of an eye, a momentary flicker in the eternal dance of light and void. This does not mean the Naaru do not value mortal lives, for they clearly do, dedicating themselves to the protection and nurturing of the mortal races. But it does mean that the Naaru may weigh short-term suffering against long-term benefit in ways that mortals find difficult to accept. A mortal who loses a loved one to violence or disease experiences that loss as absolute, as a tragedy beyond measure. A Naaru, while feeling compassion for that mortal's pain, might also see how the loss fits into a larger pattern, how the death of one might lead to events that save thousands of others. This difference in perspective can create tension between the Naaru and the mortals they seek to help. The Naaru's assurances that all will work out for the best can feel hollow to those who are currently suffering, even if those assurances are ultimately proven true. The Naaru's willingness to accept their own suffering as part of a greater plan is perhaps their most distinctive characteristic. Muru went to his fate knowing what awaited him, understanding that he would be drained and transformed and ultimately destroyed. He did not seek to escape, did not call upon his fellow Naaru for rescue, did not rage against the cruelty of those who captured him. He accepted his suffering as the price of redemption for those who wronged him, a price he was willing to pay because he believed the outcome would be worth the cost. The Naaru's vulnerability in their void state has been exploited by various forces throughout history. The Burning Legion discovered that a darkened Naaru could be manipulated more easily than one filled with light, its corrupted energies useful for demonic purposes. The ethereals of the Shadow Guard sought out void Naaru specifically, hoping to harness their darkness for their own goals. Even mortal mages have occasionally attempted to tap into the power of a fallen Naaru, though such attempts rarely end well for anyone involved. When players encountered Muru in the Sunwell Plateau, he had already entered his void state. The battle against him triggered the final stage of his transformation, and before the assembled heroes' eyes, Muru became Entropius, a void god composed entirely of shadow and entropy. The name Entropius was derived from entropy, a reference to the disorder and chaos that the void god now represented. Some parts of Muru's original form remained visible even after the transformation, a haunting reminder of what he had once been. The heroes were forced to destroy what remained of Muru, slaying the void god that he had become. But from his defeat came an unexpected gift. The dying spark of Muru, that tiny fragment of light that survived even the void god's destruction, was recovered by Prophet Velen. Using this spark, Velen purified and reignited the Sunwell, transforming it from a fount of pure arcane energy into a source of both arcane and holy power. The Sunwell's restoration marked the beginning of a spiritual rebirth for the Blood Elf nation, proof that even from the greatest tragedies, hope could emerge. Muru's sacrifice had not been in vain, though the cost of that sacrifice remained a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in the Naaru's dual nature. The Naaru's most significant intervention in mortal affairs began not on Azeroth, but on a distant world called Argus. This world was home to the Eredar, a race of highly intelligent and magically gifted beings who had built one of the most advanced civilizations in the known universe. The Eredar were led by a triumvirate of rulers, 3 of the most powerful sorcerers their race had ever produced: Archimond, Kil'jaeden, and Velen. Under their guidance, the Eredar had achieved wonders of magic and technology that rivaled anything the cosmos had ever seen. But the Eridar's achievements attracted attention from beyond the stars. Sargeras, the fallen titan who had once been a champion of order and creation, had witnessed the Eridar's power and desired to add them to his burning legion. He came to Argus with promises of even greater power, of knowledge that would make the Eridar masters of the cosmos. Archimonde and Kil'jaeden were seduced by these promises, but Velen saw through Sargeras's lies. He recognized the Titan for what he truly was, a bringer of destruction whose promises of power were merely bait to lure the Eridar into eternal servitude. Velen tried to warn his fellow leaders, but Archimonde and Kil'jaeden would not listen. They had already begun their transformation into the first of the Man'ari, the corrupted Eridar who would become some of the Burning Legion's most powerful servants. Velen was forced to flee, but he had no ship, no army, and no clear destination. All he had was his faith in the light and his desperate prayers for salvation. Those prayers were answered. The Atamal, crystal, a sacred artifact that the Eridar had venerated for generations, began to glow and rose from its pedestal. A voice spoke to Velen, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, that filled his mind with warmth and hope, even as the world collapsed around him. The voice identified itself as belonging to the Naaru, a race of sapient energy beings who were dedicated to stopping the Burning Legion. The Naaru offered to take Velen and any Eridar who wished to flee away from Argus to safety. The moment of contact between Cure and Velen was transformative for both beings. For Velen, it was the answer to prayers he had not known how to phrase, the salvation he had sought without knowing what form it would take. For Cure, it was the fulfillment of a purpose he had carried since the dawn of creation, the opportunity to guide a race of tremendous potential away from the darkness that threatened to consume them. The bond forged in that moment would endure for 25,000 years through hardships that would have broken lesser beings. The Naaru had been aware of the Eridar for some time, watching from afar as this gifted race built their civilization on Argus. They had recognized the potential within the Eridar, the capacity for both tremendous good and terrible evil that lay dormant within their souls. The Naaru had hoped that the Eridar would find their own way to the light, would develop their spiritual nature without external intervention. But when Sargeras came with his corrupting influence, the Naaru knew that the time for observation had ended. They would have to act or lose the Eridar forever. The decision to intervene was not unanimous among the Naaru. Some argued that the Eridar's fate was their own to determine, that the Naaru had no right to interfere in the choices of another race. Others pointed out that Sargera himself was interfering, that the Naaru would merely be balancing the scales rather than tipping them. In the end, the argument was settled by Kure, who felt a calling to reach out to Velen that he could not ignore. Whether this calling was a manifestation of the light's will or simply Kure's own compassion remains a matter of debate among scholars of Naaru theology. The Naaru who made this offer was Kure, a being whose compassion for the plight of the Eridar moved him to direct intervention. Kure instructed Velen to gather his followers and head to the highest mountain of Argus during the longest day of the year. There, a dimensional ship would be waiting to carry them to safety. Kure also revealed an astonishing truth. The Atamal crystal that the Eridar had long venerated was itself a gift from the Naaru, given to them in ancient times. It served as a beacon by which the Naaru could find Velen and his followers when the time came for their rescue. Velen worked desperately to gather those Eridar who remained loyal to the light. He entrusted an old friend named Talgath with helping to bring his family to safety, including his mate Nuri and their young son. But Talgath had been corrupted by Sargeras's promises, and he betrayed Velen to kill Jaden. The demons moved to intercept the fleeing Eridar, and it seemed for a moment that all hope was lost. Yet Kure and the Naaru had not underestimated the dangers. The dimensional ship Genedar descended from the sky, a massive crystalline vessel that seemed to be made of solidified starlight. Velen and his followers, numbering only in the hundreds, raced aboard the ship even as Kil'jaeden and Archimonde led their demons in pursuit. The Genedar lifted off from Argus just ahead of the Legion's grasp, carrying its passengers into the void between worlds. Those Eridar who escaped would come to call themselves draenei, meaning the exiled ones in their native tongue, for they had given up everything they knew for the sake of their freedom and their souls. Aboard the Genedar were several Naaru who had volunteered to guide and protect the fleeing draenei. Kura served as the ship's pilot and spiritual leader, his radiance filling the vessel's corridors and offering comfort to the terrified refugees who had left everything they knew behind. Ka'ara, Dore, and Adal were also present, each contributing their own power and wisdom to the survival of the refugees. These Naaru would remain with the draenei for the next 25,000 years, guiding them across the cosmos in their desperate flight from the Legion's pursuit. The relationship between the Naaru and the draenei grew deeper with each passing century. The draenei came to revere the Naaru not merely as allies, but as spiritual guides, beings whose connection to the light offered a model for how the draenei themselves might develop. The Naaru taught the draenei about the light, instructing them in the use of holy magic and helping them develop the traditions that would define their culture. The gift of the Naaru, a racial ability that allows draenei to heal themselves and others, was one result of this spiritual education. Prophet Velen's connection to the Naaru was particularly profound. He had been the one to receive Kure's original message, the one to whom the Naaru had first revealed themselves. Throughout the long flight from Argus, Velen maintained a close relationship with the Naaru aboard the Genedar, consulting them for guidance and drawing upon their wisdom to lead his people. The visions that allowed Velen to foresee the future were strengthened by his connection to the light, a connection that the Naaru helped him nurture and develop. The Atamal crystal that the Naaru had given to the Eridar in ancient times remained a sacred object among the draenei. This artifact served multiple purposes. It was a beacon that allowed the Naaru to locate the draenei across the vastness of space, a source of holy power that the draenei could draw upon in times of need, and a symbol of the covenant between the draenei and their celestial protectors. The crystal was eventually split into multiple fragments, each possessing tremendous power, though the original whole was lost to history. The 7 fragments of the Atamal crystal each possessed distinct properties and purposes. The heart of fury burned with righteous anger, channeling the light's wrath against evil. The leaf of wind granted swiftness and grace, allowing its bearer to move like the wind itself. The stone of light provided illumination in the darkest places, a literal manifestation of hope. The crest of knowledge enhanced understanding and wisdom, helping the draenei preserve their vast accumulated learning. The sigil of wisdom granted insight into truth, allowing its bearer to see through deception. The crystal of shadows, despite its ominous name, served to banish darkness rather than embrace it. The crown of the triumvirate was the greatest of the fragments, containing more power than the other six combined. These fragments became objects of veneration and protection among the draenei. Each was entrusted to a guardian who would defend it with their life, for the loss of any fragment would weaken the whole. The Naaru had designed the crystal to function in this distributed way, understanding that the draenei might need to scatter across different worlds and that a single artifact could be too easily captured or destroyed. The fragments maintained their connection across any distance, allowing the draenei to retain their link to the Naaru even when separated. The theological significance of the Adamal crystal cannot be overstated. For the draenei, it represented the moment when the light reached out to save them from darkness, the proof that they had not been abandoned, even when all seemed lost. Every ceremony, every prayer, every ritual the draenei performed was colored by their awareness of this gift and the covenant it represented. The crystal was more than an artifact. It was the physical embodiment of the Naaru's promise to guide and protect the draenei for as long as the light endured. At some point after the escape from Argus, the Genedar split into two separate vessels. The most elite of the draenei's warriors boarded a ship called the Zenidar, along with the Naaru xe'ra. These warriors would become the light-forged draenei who had undergone a ritual that infused them with the light's power at a fundamental level. While the Genedar continued to flee from world to world, always staying one step ahead of the Legion's hunters, the Zenidar and its crew took a different approach. They turned to face their pursuers, striking back against the demons in an open war that would rage for millennia. The draenei aboard the Genedar visited dozens of worlds in their flight across the cosmos, never staying in one place for long. Each time they settled on a new world, they would begin to build a new life for themselves, only to be forced to flee when the Legion's hunters caught up with them. The Naaru guided them through this endless journey, providing hope and direction when despair threatened to overwhelm the weary refugees. For 25,000 years, this pattern continued, the draenei always running, the Legion always pursuing. But even the Naaru are not immune to the ravages of time and circumstance. Approximately 2 centuries before what mortals would come to know as the First War, the Genedar approached a world that the draenei would eventually name Draenor. xe'ra, the Naaru who had served as the ship's pilot since the flight from Argus, began to weaken. The reasons for this weakening remain unclear, though some suggest that the strain of maintaining the ship for millennia had finally taken its toll. Whatever the cause, xe'ra's faltering strength meant that the Genedar could no longer maintain its flight. As xe'ra weakened, another crisis emerged. Xe'ra, who had remained stable throughout the long journey, lost her connection to the light. The transition was sudden and violent as the Naaru's form shifted from radiant light to consuming void. Kiara's final act of consciousness was to convince the draenei to eject her from the vessel before her void energies could harm those aboard. But even this was not simple, for the void energy that now filled Xe'ra instinctively caused her to lash out against the other Naaru. A battle erupted within the Genedar, Kara's darkness clashing with the light of Kure and Dor in a conflict that threatened to tear the ship apart. Prophet Velen stepped into this maelstrom of light and shadow, using his own connection to the holy energies to shield the other Naaru from Kara's attacks. The effort required everything he had, pushing him to the very limits of his considerable power. He managed to cast Kara out of the vessel, but the battle left him gravely weakened. His visions of the future, which had guided the draenei for millennia, became unreliable. The gift of prophecy that had once been his greatest strength was diminished, leaving him uncertain in ways he had not experienced since the flight from Argus. With Kara ejected and Kuur failing, the Genedar began an uncontrolled descent toward the surface of Draenor. Dor attempted to help stabilize the ship, but the Naaru was caught in the chaos of the crash. As the Genedar plummeted toward the western plains of what would become Nagrand, Dor was all but killed by the impact. The Genedar came to rest on the surface of Draenor, its crystalline hull partially buried in the earth, its systems dead or dying. The draenei had finally found a world where they could stop running, but the cost of their arrival was the loss of nearly everything that had sustained them. Kara, ejected during the battle, fell separately from the ship. She landed somewhere in the region that would become Shadow Moon Valley, her void-filled form hovering in the sky above the land like a dark star. The orcs who lived in this region had never seen anything like her. They did not understand what they were witnessing, this dark sphere that seemed to drink in the light around it. They called her the Dark Star, and her presence would shape their culture in ways they could not have imagined. The Shadow Moon clan, the orcs who made their home in the valley below the Dark Star, began to study this mysterious phenomenon. These orcs had always been spiritually attuned, their shamans skilled at reading the movements of the stars and communicating with the spirits of their ancestors. The appearance of the dark star seemed to them a profound omen, a sign from the cosmos that demanded interpretation. By observing the dark star, they discovered the powers of the void, learning to tap into shadow magic that had never before been practiced on Draenor. This discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying, for the shadow magic offered power beyond what traditional shamanic practices could achieve. Some orcs began to use these powers to defile the spirits of their ancestors, corrupting the foundations of orcish spiritual practice. The practice horrified the clan's leaders. The chieftain outlawed the use of shadow magic, forbidding any orc from drawing upon the dark star's power. But the knowledge had been gained, and it would not be easily forgotten. In the alternate version of Draenor, Kara's story took a different path. Ner'zhul, coerced by Gromish Hellscream into serving the Iron Horde, broke the ancient laws of his clan and called upon the Dark Star's power. The Shadow Moon clan gained access to void magic, using it to raise undead and fight the draenei in Shadow Moon Valley. The alternate Velen recognized the danger and sacrificed his own life to purify Kara, channeling his life force into the Naaru and restoring her to her light-filled state. The restored Kara proved to be a powerful ally in the defense of Karabor, her holy energies helping to annihilate the Iron Fleet. Kara's redemption demonstrated that even Naaru who had fallen into darkness could return to the light. The word Kara means dark in Turkish, and it is possible that the Temple of Karabor was named after Kara. One region of the temple is even called the Karani Terrace, suggesting a deep connection between the Naaru and this sacred site. Xe'ra and xe'ra share the distinction of being the only Naaru referred to with feminine pronouns in the game's lore. The wreckage of the Genedar embedded itself in the landscape of Nagrand, its crystalline hull rising from the plains like a mountain made of diamond. The orcs of this region also saw the crashed vessel, but they did not recognize it for what it was. To them, it appeared to be a natural formation, the largest and most beautiful mountain they had ever seen. They called it Oshugun, which meant mountain of spirits in their language, for they sensed that there was something sacred about this place. Deep within the crystalline structure of Oshugun, the Naaru Kure remained trapped. The crash had injured him severely, and his holy energies were slowly bleeding away into the void. As the centuries passed, a void began to grow within Kure, filling the space that the light had once occupied. Kure watched helplessly as this void grew, knowing that it was consuming not just his own energy, but the souls of the orcs who died near Oshugun. The spirits of the deceased were drawn to the growing void within him, unable to resist its pull, and they were consumed by an energy that Kuyur could not control. This accidental consumption of orcish souls would have far-reaching consequences for both the orcs and the draenei. The orc shamans who sought to commune with their ancestors began to travel to Oshugun, sensing that the spirits of the dead were drawn to this place. They did not understand why their ancestors seemed to congregate around the mountain of spirits, but they built their traditions around this observation. The Koshharg festivals, great gatherings of the Orcish clans, were relocated to Oshugun to take advantage of its spiritual significance. Kur, despite his weakened and dangerous state, managed to maintain enough consciousness to guide these developments. Through subtle influence on the orcish spirits that had not yet been consumed, Kuyur shaped the orcs' religious practices in ways that would help sustain him and prevent him from falling completely into the void. Blessed waters and other offerings were regularly brought to the mountain of spirits, and these offerings contained enough holy energy to slow Kure's deterioration. It was a desperate measure, a way of clinging to existence while trapped in a failing form, but it worked well enough to keep Kure alive for centuries. The draenei were aware of Kure's predicament, but there was little they could do to help him. They recognized the orcs' reverence for Oshugun and chose not to interfere with their traditions. In a way, the orcs were providing the care that Kure needed to survive, even if they did not understand the true nature of what they were tending. The draenei retreated from the area around Oshugun, leaving the orcs to their rituals while they established their own settlements elsewhere on Draenor. The arrangement might have continued indefinitely if not for the intervention of the Burning Legion. When Kil'jaeden finally located the draenei on Draenor, he began his scheme to use the orcs as weapons against his hated enemies. Part of this scheme involved cutting the orcs off from their ancestral spirits, weakening their connection to the elements, and making them more susceptible to demonic corruption. Kil'jaeden and his servant Gul'dan erected a barrier around Oshugun that prevented the ancestral spirits and Kure from making contact with the outside world. The orcs were forbidden, on Blackhand's orders, from ever returning to the Mountain of Spirits. Demons were stationed around Oshugun to ensure that this order was obeyed. With the barrier in place, Ku'ura's slow deterioration accelerated. He could no longer receive the offerings that had sustained him, and the void within him grew stronger. The spirits of the Orcish ancestors who had gathered around him were trapped within the barrier, unable to return to their descendants or to escape the void that was slowly consuming them. Kuyur raged against his imprisonment, but there was nothing he could do. He had been a being of tremendous power, one of the Naaru who had saved the draenei from extinction, and now he was trapped within a dying form, watching helplessly as the souls of those who had inadvertently sustained him were devoured by the darkness that was growing within him. In the alternate version of Draenor that adventurers visited during the war against the Iron Horde, Ku'ura's fate took an even darker turn. The orc warlock Cho'Gall, seeking power to use against both Gul'dan and the Draenei, descended into the depths of Oshu'gun to subjugate Kure. But Cho'Gall was not content merely to drain the Naaru's power. He accelerated Kure's transition into the void, forcing the Naaru to complete his transformation into a void god. The creature that emerged, called Decimatus, was a being of pure darkness and destruction, a twisted mockery of everything Kure had once represented. Adventurers were forced to destroy Decimatus, ending Kure's millennia of existence in the most tragic way possible. Prophet Velen mourned Kure's death deeply. In a message to those who had witnessed the Naaru's destruction, Velen acknowledged that Kure's fate could not have been prevented. The transformation into a void god was the culmination of a process that had begun with the crash of the Genedar centuries before. Velen praised Kure as the true savior of his people, a friend to the virtuous, and a teacher of prophets. Without Kure's intervention on Argus, the Draenei would never have escaped the Legion's corruption. Without his guidance during the long flight across the cosmos, they would never have survived to reach Draenor. His final years, trapped and suffering within Oshu'gun, were a cruel end to a noble existence, but they did not diminish the greatness of what he had accomplished. While Kuyur suffered within Oshu'gun, the Naaru Dore lay in a different kind of captivity. Dore had been all but killed in the crash of the Genedar, his crystalline form shattered and his light nearly extinguished. The Draenei recovered what remained of him and laid his remains to rest in a crypt they constructed for this purpose. This crypt would become the first chamber of a vast complex that the Draenei would call Auchendone, the final resting place for their dead on Draenor. Dore was not truly dead, not in the way that mortals understand death. The spark of light that defined his existence still flickered within the shattered remains of his form, but he was in no condition to communicate, to act, or to fulfill any of the purposes that had once driven him. He lay dormant within his crypt, slowly regenerating as only a Naaru can, drawing upon the faint traces of holy energy that seeped into his resting place. The process would take centuries, perhaps millennia, and there was no guarantee that he would ever fully recover. As Dore lay dormant, his void state exerted an influence that he could not control. Just as Kure's growing void drew the spirits of dead orcs to Oshu'gun, Dore's condition drew the spirits of dead Draenei to Auchendone. The Draenei who died on Draenor found their souls pulled toward the complex where Dore rested, congregating in the chambers that surrounded his crypt. This attraction was not malevolent on Dore's part. He had no consciousness to direct it, but it had the effect of making Auchendown the most haunted place on Draenor. The draenei did not fully understand what was happening, but they adapted their practices to accommodate it. Auchendown became their sacred burial ground, the place where all draenei were interred after death. The fact that spirits seemed to linger there was interpreted as a blessing, a sign that the dead were not truly gone, but remained to watch over the living. Elaborate ceremonies were developed to honor the ancestors whose spirits resided within Auchendown's halls. The draenei had no idea that these spirits were being slowly consumed by the void energies that emanated from Dore's damaged form. Dore himself was aware, on some level, of what was happening. When adventurers later encountered him in the shattered remains of Auchendown, he expressed regret for what his void state had done to the spirits of the draenei dead. But he also acknowledged that there was nothing to be done to stop the cycle. It was simply part of the Naaru condition, a consequence of their dual nature that could not be avoided. The light and the void were intertwined within every Naaru, and when one dominated, the other receded but never disappeared entirely. The destruction of Auchendown during the rise of the Old Horde accelerated Dore's deterioration. When the Orcish warlocks sought to sever the draenei from their ancestors, just as they had severed the orcs, they targeted Auchendown as a site of spiritual power. The explosion that resulted from their ritual tore the complex apart, scattering the remains of the draenei dead and further damaging Dore's already weakened form. The Naaru survived, but he was pushed deeper into his void state, his regeneration set back by centuries. The explosion at Auchendown had effects that reached far beyond the immediate destruction of the complex. The release of spiritual energy attracted the attention of entities from beyond the physical world, beings that fed on death and suffering. The Shadow Council, the Orcish organization that had orchestrated the ritual, found themselves dealing with forces they had not anticipated. The ruins of Auchendown became a nexus of dark power, a place where the barriers between the physical world and the realms of death grew thin. Among the beings drawn to Auchendown was Murmur, a creature of pure sound who had been summoned or awakened by the explosion. This entity of devastation took up residence in the shattered ruins, its presence making the complex even more dangerous than it had been before. The combination of Dore's void energies, the trapped spirits of the draenei dead, and Murmur's destructive nature transformed Auchendown into a place of nightmare, a monument to the tragedy that the Orcish invasion had brought to Draenor. The draenei who survived the destruction of their civilization on Draenor mourned the loss of Auchendown deeply. The complex had been more than a burial ground. It had been a living connection to their ancestors, a place where the past and present intersected, where the wisdom of those who had passed on could still be accessed by those who remained. With Auchendown destroyed, that connection was severed. The draenei who remained on Draenor found themselves cut off from their spiritual heritage, forced to rebuild their relationship with their ancestors from scratch. Dore became a symbol of this tragedy, a Naaru who had given everything to protect the draenei and who now suffered in darkness because of it. Those draenei who knew the truth of what lay within Auchendown visited Dore when they could, bringing offerings and prayers that might help sustain him through his long regeneration. They did not know if their efforts made any difference, but they continued nonetheless, maintaining their vigil over the fallen Naaru as an act of faith and gratitude. When adventurers finally encountered Deor in the ruins of Auchendune, he was still in his void state, a dark presence in a place that had once been dedicated to the light. He worked with these adventurers to find a way to address the damage that his condition had caused, seeking to free the spirits that his void energies had trapped. Dor knew that his own recovery was still far in the future, that he would remain in this darkened state for ages to come, but he had not lost hope that he would eventually return to the light. The spark still burned within him, however faintly, and as long as that spark remained, there was always the possibility of restoration. While the Naaru of the Genedar struggled with their various fates on Draenor, other Naaru were taking action elsewhere in the cosmos. The great divide that had occurred after the flight from Argus had created two distinct branches of the draenei people, each following a different path in the struggle against the Burning Legion. Those who remained on the Genedar continued their flight, seeking always to stay one step ahead of the demons who pursued them. But those who boarded the Zenidar with the Naaru xe'ra chose a different approach entirely. The Army of the Light was born from this division, a military force dedicated to striking back against the Legion rather than merely fleeing from it. xe'ra, one of the eldest and most powerful of the Naaru, served as the spiritual leader of this army, guiding its strategies and sustaining its warriors through the darkest moments of their eternal war. Under her leadership, the Army of the Light became the Burning Legion's most persistent and formidable opponent, an enemy that refused to be crushed no matter how many defeats it suffered. The warriors who served in the Army of the Light underwent a transformation that set them apart from ordinary draenei. They became light-forged, beings who had been infused with the light's power at a fundamental level through a ritual of profound significance. This ritual bound their souls to the light so thoroughly that they became almost as radiant as the Naaru themselves, their forms glowing with holy energy that could never be fully extinguished. The process of becoming light-forged was neither easy nor without risk. Candidates had to prove themselves worthy through trials that tested their faith, their courage, and their commitment to the light's cause. Those who failed the trials were not simply rejected. Some were consumed by the very power they sought to channel, their bodies unable to contain the light that flowed through them. But those who succeeded emerged transformed, their lifespans extended, their powers enhanced, their connection to the light perfected in ways that ordinary draenei could never achieve. The Forge of Aeons, the device used to create light-forged warriors, was one of the Naaru's greatest gifts to the Army of the Light. This vast apparatus channeled pure holy energy directly into the candidate's soul, burning away impurities and infusing every fiber of their being with the light's essence. The process was painful beyond description, a crucible that tested the limits of endurance. Those who emerged from the forge were forever changed, their very blood transformed into liquid light that glowed beneath their skin. The light forged bore physical marks of their transformation. Their eyes blazed with golden radiance. Their skin took on an ethereal luminescence, and runic symbols appeared on their flesh, permanent marks of the light's blessing. These were not merely cosmetic changes. Each mark represented a connection to the Naaru, a channel through which holy power could flow. The more complete the transformation, the more marks appeared until the most devoted Lightforged were covered in intricate patterns that pulsed with the rhythm of the light itself. The psychological effects of becoming Lightforged were equally profound. Fear of death diminished dramatically, for the Lightforged knew with absolute certainty that they served a cause greater than themselves. Doubt became almost impossible, replaced by unwavering conviction in the righteousness of the fight against the Legion. This certainty was both strength and weakness, made the Lightforged fearless warriors, but it also made them inflexible, unable to consider perspectives that conflicted with their holy mission. The relationship between the Lightforged and the Naaru was more intimate than any other mortal Naaru bond. The Lightforged could sense the Naaru's presence across vast distances, could draw upon their power in moments of need, could communicate with them through channels that ordinary draenei could not access. In a sense, the Lightforged became extensions of the Naaru's will, mortal hands through which the beings of light could act in the physical world. This connection was a privilege, but it also meant that the Lightforged had less freedom than their unmodified kin. Their choices were constrained by their bond, their paths determined by the light's needs. Turalyon, a human paladin who had been one of the first knights of the Silver Hand on Azeroth, became one of the army of the light's greatest champions. He had traveled to Draenor during the events that created Outland and had been thought lost when the Dark Portal was destroyed. In truth, he had been drawn into the twisting nether and eventually encountered xe'ra and her forces. The Prime Naaru saw in Turalyon a champion of tremendous potential, a mortal who had dedicated his life to the light and who possessed the strength of will necessary to become Lightforged. Alleria Windrunner accompanied Turalyon on this journey, though her path would take a very different direction. As a High Elf Ranger, Alleria had no connection to the light in the way that Turalyon did. She fought alongside the army of the light as an ally rather than as a devotee, her skills with bow and blade proving invaluable even without the Lightforged enhancement. But her exposure to the void whispers that permeated the twisting nether would eventually lead her down a path that even xe'ra could not have anticipated. The relationship between Turalyon and Alleria became a symbol of the tensions within the army of the light itself. Turalyon embraced the Naaru's teachings fully, becoming one of their most devoted champions. Alleria remained skeptical, appreciating the Naaru's power while questioning their motives and methods. This difference created friction between them, not enough to destroy their love, but enough to complicate it. xe'ra watched this dynamic with interest, perhaps seeing in it a microcosm of the challenges she faced in leading mortal champions who did not share her absolute faith in the light's righteousness. Alleria's eventual embrace of void power was deeply troubling to the Naaru. They had accepted her presence among the army of the light because of her relationship with Turalyon and her proven skill in battle. But when she began studying the void, learning to harness its power as a weapon against the Legion, the Naaru's tolerance was tested. xe'ra, in particular, viewed Alleria's choices as a betrayal, a rejection of the light's gifts in favor of the very darkness that the Naaru had sworn to oppose. The conflict between Alleria and the Naaru foreshadowed the larger confrontation that would occur between xe'ra and Illidan. In both cases, the Naaru's inability to accept that their champions might choose different paths led to tragedy. Xe'ra could not comprehend that Illyria might serve the same cause, the defeat of the Burning Legion, through different means. She saw only betrayal where others might see flexibility and adaptation. The 1,000 years that Turalyon and Illyria spent fighting alongside the army of the light transformed them both in ways that their friends on Azeroth could never have imagined. Turalyon became a paladin of legendary power, his connection to the light strengthened by decades of intimate contact with the Naaru. Illyria became something stranger, a ranger who could wield void energy as naturally as she once wielded her bow, her eyes reflecting the darkness she had learned to command. They were united in their love and in their purpose, but separated by the fundamental nature of the powers they had each come to embody. The war against the Burning Legion had raged for tens of thousands of years, and the forces of the light were stretched thin across countless battlefields. The Legion's armies seemed infinite, constantly replenished from the depths of the twisting nether, no matter how many demons fell in battle. For every world the army of the light saved, a dozen others fell to demonic corruption. The war was one of attrition that the army of the light could not ultimately win, a truth that Xe'ra refused to accept. It was this refusal that drove Xe'ra to seek out the child of light and shadow, the prophesied champion who would bring final victory against the Legion. The Prime Naaru had observed countless mortals across the ages, watching for signs of the one who was destined to end the demonic threat forever. When she identified Illidan's Stormrage as the subject of the prophecy, she became obsessed with ensuring that he fulfilled his destiny, regardless of whether he wished to do so. The prophecy of the child of light and shadow was ancient, older perhaps than the Legion itself. It spoke of a being who would embody both cosmic forces, who would walk the line between radiance and darkness, and who would ultimately bring about the end of the demonic threat. The details of the prophecy were vague, as prophecies often are, subject to interpretation and debate among those who studied them. But Xe'ra had become convinced that she understood its true meaning, and that Illidan's Stormrage was the champion it described. What Xe'ra saw in Illidan that convinced her of his identity as the prophesied child remains a matter of speculation. Perhaps it was his consumption of fell energy, the way he had taken the power of demons into himself and used it against them. Perhaps it was his willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own soul, in pursuit of his goals. Perhaps it was simply that Illidan was the most powerful mortal she had ever observed, a being whose capabilities matched the scale of the threat the Legion represented. Whatever her reasoning, Xe'ra's conviction became absolute. She began shaping events to ensure that Illidan would fulfill his destiny, manipulating circumstances from afar in ways that mortals could not perceive. The creation of Light's heart, the vessel that would preserve Illidan's soul, was part of this plan. The positioning of the army of the light to be ready when the final battle came was another. Everything Xe'ra did was aimed at the moment when Illidan would stand before her, ready to receive the transformation that she believed would make him the champion of light. The irony was that Xe'ra's certainty about Illidan's destiny may have blinded her to the most important aspect of the prophecy. The child of light and shadow was to embody both forces, not be consumed by one of them. By seeking to purge Illidan's darkness and replace it with light, xe'ra may have been working against the very prophecy she sought to fulfill. Her inability to accept Illidan as he was, rather than as she wished him to be, would ultimately prove her undoing. The army of the light, led by the Naaru xe'ra and crewed by the light-forged draenei, who had split from the Genadar millennia before, fought a desperate campaign against seemingly infinite demonic forces. But even this army could not be everywhere at once, and there were worlds that cried out for help that the army of the light could not provide. One such world was Outland, the shattered remnant of Draenor that drifted in the twisting nether after the Orcish warlocks tore the planet apart. This broken world had become a battleground between the forces of Illidan Stormrage, who had claimed it as his domain, and the Burning Legion, which sought to use it as a staging ground for their third invasion of Azeroth. The draenei who had survived on Outland, led by Prophet Velen, watched this conflict with growing alarm. They had fled the Legion for 25,000 years, and now the demons had finally found them. Khadgar, the human archmage who had come to Outland during the Second War, also recognized the danger. He knew that neither the draenei nor Illidan's forces could stand alone against the full might of the Burning Legion. What they needed was powerful allies, beings who could tip the balance of power in their favor. Khadgar and Velen reached out to the Naaru independently, both praying for aid against the darkness that threatened to overwhelm them. The army of the light heard their pleas. xe'ra and her forces were engaged in battles of their own, conflicts that demanded all of their resources and attention. The army of the light could not spare soldiers to protect Outland, but 3 Naaru volunteered to answer the call: Adol, Moru, and Oros. These 3 would go to Outland and do what they could to aid the people there, even though they would be operating without the support of the larger army. The Naaru arrived on Outland aboard Tempest Keep, a massive dimensional fortress that served as both their vessel and their base of operations. Tempest Keep was a marvel of Naaru engineering, a structure of crystal and light that could traverse the twisting nether as easily as a ship sails across an ocean. It contained living quarters, weapons systems, and vast chambers designed for the specific needs of the Naaru. Most importantly, it contained a source of power that could sustain the Naaru's operations for as long as they remained on Outland. Adol, the leader of the 3, established himself in the city of Shatrath, which had been devastated during the original Orcish invasion, but was now being rebuilt by the draenei and other refugees. The city had once been a thriving center of draenei civilization, home to countless thousands who had worshipped the light and lived in harmony with the Naaru's teachings. The Orcish horde had reduced it to ruins during their genocidal campaign against the draenei, but the city's spirit had not been entirely extinguished. Under Adol's leadership, Shatrath would rise again as a beacon of hope in a shattered land. The reconstruction of Shatrath was itself a miracle of restoration. The city's original structures, built from crystals that resonated with holy energy, had been shattered during the Orcish assault. The demons who later occupied Outland had further desecrated the ruins, filling them with fell corruption and twisted magic. Adol's first act upon arriving was to purify the corruption, sending waves of holy energy through the shattered streets and driving out the demonic taint that had infested the city. The architecture of the new Shatrath reflected the cooperation between the various races who called it home. Draenei spires rose alongside Aldor terraces and Scryer sanctuaries, each section designed to accommodate its residents while contributing to the whole. Adal insisted that the city remain open to all who sought shelter, regardless of their faction or allegiance. This policy was controversial among some of the residents who had difficulty accepting former enemies as neighbors. But Adal's gentle persistence wore down resistance, and gradually the vision of a united city began to take shape. The Terrace of Light, where Adal made his home, became the heart of the new Shatrath. This great plaza was visible from anywhere in the city, a constant reminder of the Naaru's presence and the hope he represented. Pilgrims came from across Outland to gaze upon Adal, to bask in his radiance, to receive whatever wisdom he chose to share. Many left transformed by the experience, their faith strengthened and their purpose renewed. Others found themselves questioning beliefs they had held for lifetimes, challenged by perspectives they had never considered. Adal's judgment in matters of justice was sought by all factions within the city. When disputes arose that could not be resolved by ordinary means, the parties would bring their case before the Naaru. Adal's verdicts were always fair, though not always satisfying to those who received them. He had a talent for finding solutions that addressed the underlying needs of all parties, even when those needs conflicted with their stated demands. His wisdom in these matters earned him respect, even from those who initially doubted the value of Naaru guidance. Adal took up residence in the central dome of the Terrace of Light, where his radiant form could be seen by all who entered the city. His presence had a profound effect on those who dwelt within Shatrath's walls. Refugees who had lost everything found comfort in his gentle emanations. Warriors who had seen too much death found renewed purpose in his quiet strength. Even those who had never believed in the light found themselves moved by the serenity that Adal projected throughout the city. The Shatar, a name meaning born from light in the draenei tongue, was formed as Adal's personal faction. This organization was dedicated to defending Outland and striking back against the demons who had corrupted it. The Shatar gathered under Adal's banner all who wished to oppose the forces of darkness, regardless of their origins or past allegiances. The faction included draenei refugees, human and elven survivors of Azeroth's conflicts, and even some orcs who had rejected the demonic corruption that had destroyed their people. Khadgar, the human archmage who had been instrumental in closing the Dark Portal during the Second War, became one of Adal's closest advisors. The two worked together to coordinate the defense of Outland, combining Khadgar's knowledge of arcane magic and military strategy with Adal's spiritual guidance and cosmic perspective. Their partnership would prove essential in the battles to come, as the forces of Illidan's Stormrage and the Burning Legion threatened to tear Outland apart. The Shatar also worked to reconcile the bitter rivalry between two other factions that had established themselves in Shatrath, the Aldor and the Scryers. The Aldor were draenei priests who had served the light for millennia, while the Scryers were blood elves who had defected from Kael'thas's forces after witnessing the depths of his corruption. These two groups despised each other, their mutual hatred threatening to destabilize the fragile peace that Adal was trying to maintain. Adal handled this conflict with characteristic patience and wisdom. Rather than forcing the two factions to reconcile before they were ready, he gave them separate quarters within the city and allowed them to pursue their own agendas, so long as those agendas served the greater goal of opposing the darkness. Over time, as both factions worked alongside each other in the Shatar's campaigns, some of the hatred began to fade. The example of cooperation that Adal modeled slowly influenced those around him, demonstrating that even the deepest enmities could be overcome in service of a greater cause. The Aldor occupied the upper tier of Shatrath, their spire rising toward the sky as a symbol of their dedication to the light. These draenei priests had served the Naaru for millennia, their traditions stretching back to the days before the flight from Argus. They viewed themselves as the true keepers of the light's teachings, the inheritors of a sacred tradition that had been preserved through 25,000 years of exile. Their arrival in Shatrath was for them a homecoming of sorts, a chance to rebuild the kind of temple city that they had lost when Draenei fell. The Scryers, by contrast, occupied the lower tier, their quarters reflecting their more recent conversion to the cause of opposing the Legion. These blood elves had once served Cael'thas, had followed him to Outland believing that he would lead them to salvation. What they found instead was a prince who had sold his soul to the very demons he claimed to oppose. The Scryer's leader, Vorenthal the Seer, had led his followers to Adal in an act of defection that shocked both factions. His explanation was simple. He had seen a vision of Shatrath's future, a vision in which the city served as the last bastion against the darkness, and he knew that he must be part of that defense. The tension between Aldor and Scryers extended beyond mere philosophical differences. The Draenei remembered all too well what the orcs, corrupted by demonic influence, had done to their people on Draenor. They viewed the Blood Elves with suspicion, seeing in them echoes of the orcish horde that had nearly exterminated their race. The Blood Elves, for their part, resented being treated as potential traitors by people who knew nothing of their struggle. They had lost everything to the Scourge, had watched their civilization crumble, had been forced to make terrible choices to survive. They did not need lectures from draenei who had not been there. Adal's solution was elegant in its simplicity. He assigned both factions tasks that required them to work toward the same goal while maintaining their independence. The Aldor focused on combating the demonic presence in certain regions of Outland, while the Scryers concentrated on gathering intelligence about Cael'thas's plans and the Legion's activities. Both factions contributed to the Shatar's overall mission, and both earned reputation and recognition for their efforts. Over time, the simple fact of working toward shared goals began to erode the walls of suspicion between them. The Shatar was not composed solely of draenei. It welcomed all who sought to stand against the darkness, including members of both the Alliance and the Horde. Adal understood that the old enmities between these factions meant nothing compared to the threat posed by the Legion. He worked to maintain peace within Shatrath, ensuring that the city remained a neutral ground where all could find refuge. This diplomatic approach was not without its challenges, as the hatred between Alliance and Horde ran deep, but Adal's serene presence and unwavering commitment to peace helped maintain order. Muuru was assigned to remain aboard Tempest Keep, while Adal established Shatrath. But the Naaru's presence on Outland had attracted attention from an unexpected quarter. Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, the leader of the Blood Elves who had followed Illidan to Outland, saw an opportunity in the Naaru's arrival. Kael'thas had become obsessed with finding new sources of magical energy to feed his people's addiction, and the Naaru represented the purest source of holy energy he had ever encountered. When the main Naaru forces departed Tempest Keep to establish themselves elsewhere on Outland, Kael'thas launched an assault on the fortress. Muru was caught alone, without the support of his fellow Naaru or any significant defensive force. The Blood Elves succeeded in capturing him and transported him back to Silvermoon City, where he would be used to fuel their desperate need for magical sustenance. The capture of Muru by Prince Kael'thas and his Blood Elves set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the destiny of an entire people. The transportation of Muru from Outland to Silvermoon City was itself a remarkable feat of magical engineering, requiring the coordination of numerous portals and the expenditure of tremendous magical resources. The Blood Elves treated Muru as cargo, as a resource to be exploited, rather than as the sentient being that he was. This callous treatment would come back to haunt them. Muru was installed in a specially constructed chamber beneath the city where the Blood Knights could drain his holy energies to power their abilities. The chamber was designed to maximize the extraction of light from the Naaru's form, a cruel irony given that Muru had come to Outland specifically to help protect the people of that shattered world. Now he was a prisoner, his power stolen by those who cared nothing for the principles he represented. Unlike traditional paladins who drew their power from faith and devotion to the light, the Blood Knights stole their power directly from the captive Naaru. This distinction was more than merely philosophical. Paladins who served the light willingly were guided by its wisdom, shaped by its values, connected to something greater than themselves. The Blood Knights, in contrast, wielded stolen power with no connection to its source. They could perform the same feats as true paladins, but they lacked the spiritual foundation that made those feats meaningful. The creation of the Blood Knights was itself a response to tragedy. After the Scourge had destroyed Silvermoon and corrupted the Sunwell, the Blood Elves had lost their connection to the arcane energies that had sustained them for millennia. Many Blood Elves felt abandoned by the light, which had seemingly failed to protect them in their hour of greatest need. The capture of Muru was presented as an act of justice, the light finally paying what it owed to the suffering Blood Elves. Lady Laedrin, the matriarch of the Blood Knights, was the architect of this rationalization. She had once been a priestess of the light, but the fall of Silvermoon had shattered her faith. She came to believe that the light was merely a tool to be used, not a force to be worshipped. If the light would not come to the Blood Elves willingly, then they would take it by force. Muru's capture was the culmination of this philosophy, the ultimate expression of the Blood Elves' new relationship with holy power. The Blood Knights quickly became one of Silvermoon's most formidable military forces. Young Blood Elves flocked to the Order, eager to wield the power that Liadrin offered. They were trained in combat techniques that combined martial prowess with the stolen light, creating warriors who could heal, protect, and destroy with equal effectiveness. The Order grew rapidly, its members proud of their strength and contemptuous of those who questioned their methods. But there were costs that the Blood Knights did not immediately recognize. Some members of the order reported disturbing dreams, visions of crystalline forms shattering and void energies consuming light. Others found themselves plagued by inexplicable feelings of guilt, as if some part of them knew that what they were doing was wrong. These symptoms were dismissed as weakness, as the lingering influence of outdated beliefs that had no place in the new order. The Blood Knights continued their work, draining Muru of his power one session at a time. It was a violation of everything the light represented, but the Blood Elves were too desperate to care about the moral implications of their actions. What the Blood Elves did not understand, what they could not have known, was that Muru had allowed himself to be captured. The Naaru had foreseen what would happen when Kael'thas came for him, had understood the chain of events that his capture would set in motion. He knew that he would be drained, that he would enter a void state, that he would eventually be transformed into something terrible. But he also saw beyond that transformation, saw the redemption that his sacrifice might make possible. Muru went willingly to his fate because he believed that his suffering would ultimately lead to a greater good. For months, the Blood Knights drew upon Muru's power, using his light to fuel their abilities while ignoring the consequences of their actions. Lady Liadrin, the leader of the Blood Knights, justified their practices as necessary for the survival of the Blood Elf people. The draenei had abandoned them, she argued. The Alliance had cast them out. The only way forward was to take the power they needed, regardless of where it came from or how it was obtained. Under her leadership, the Blood Knights became a formidable force, their powers stolen, but no less potent for that theft. But Muru's light was not infinite. As the Blood Elves continued to drain him, the Naaru weakened. The radiance that had once filled his crystalline form dimmed, replaced by shadows that grew darker with each passing day. The Blood Knights did not notice the change at first, too focused on their own needs to pay attention to the suffering of their prisoner. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. Muru had entered his void state, and the holy energy that had fueled the Blood Knights was no longer available. Prince Kael'thas, who had long since fallen completely under the sway of the Burning Legion, saw an opportunity in Muru's transformation. He had the darkened Naaru transported to the Sunwell Plateau, the site of the ancient magical font that had once sustained the High Elves before its corruption and destruction. Kael'thas planned to use Muru's void energies to summon Kil'jaeden into Azeroth, completing his betrayal of everything his people had once stood for. The heroes of Azeroth, both Alliance and Horde, launched an assault on the Sunwell Plateau to stop Kael'thas's plan. They fought their way through the Blood Elf Prince's most powerful servants, facing challenges that tested even the mightiest adventurers. When they finally reached Muru, they found a being trapped between states, neither fully light nor fully void, but something terrible and in between. The battle against Muru pushed him over the edge, and before the assembled heroes' eyes, he transformed into Entropius, a void god of consuming darkness. The name Entropius was apt, for the creature embodied entropy in its purest form. Where Muru had once represented order and light, Entropius represented chaos and destruction. The void god sought only to consume, to draw all energy into itself and convert it to nothingness. The heroes were forced to destroy Entropius, ending Muru's existence in the most final way possible. When the void god fell, all that remained was a tiny spark, the heart of Muru, still pulsing with the faintest trace of holy light. Prophet Velen had accompanied the heroes to the Sunwell Plateau, knowing that something important would happen there but uncertain of the details. When he saw the heart of Muru, he understood what must be done. Taking the spark in his hands, Velen approached the Sunwell and used Muru's remaining essence to purify and reignite the ancient font. The Sunwell blazed back to life, but it was different now. Where it had once been a source of pure arcane energy, it was now a fount of both arcane and holy power, sanctified by Muru's sacrifice. The restoration of the Sunwell marked a turning point for the Blood Elves. The font that had sustained their civilization for millennia now flowed with both arcane and holy energy, a permanent reminder of the sacrifice that had made its rebirth possible. Blood Elves who had felt cut off from the light for so long found themselves able to connect to it once more, not through theft or coercion, but through genuine faith and devotion. The theological implications of the Sunwell's transformation were profound. Before its corruption and restoration, the Sunwell had been a purely arcane artifact, a font of magical energy with no connection to the cosmic forces of light or void. Now it had become something unprecedented, a wellspring that drew upon both arcane and holy power simultaneously. This dual nature made the restored Sunwell unique in all the known universe, a testament to Muru's sacrifice and to the creative power that could emerge from tragedy. For Blood Elf priests and paladins, the restored Sunwell offered a new path to power. Rather than stealing energy from captive Naaru, they could now draw upon the Sunwell's holy aspect, channeling power that was freely given rather than forcibly taken. This shift transformed not just their abilities, but their entire relationship with the light. They were no longer thieves and exploiters, but genuine servants, their connection to the light as authentic as that of any human paladin or dwarven priest. The Blood Elf children born after the Sunwell's restoration would grow up in a world very different from the one their parents had known. They would never experience the desperate magical hunger that had driven their elders to such extreme measures. They would learn about Muru and his sacrifice as history rather than as lived experience, a story of redemption that might seem almost too perfect to be true. Yet the Sunwell itself stood as evidence, its dual energies a constant reminder that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter futures. Some Blood Elves found the transformation difficult to accept. They had built their identities around their suffering, around their anger at being abandoned by former allies, around their pride in surviving through their own strength. The idea that their salvation had come through the sacrifice of a Naaru, through mercy rather than might, challenged everything they believed about themselves. These individuals struggled to reconcile the new reality with their established worldview, some eventually finding peace, while others remained bitter and conflicted. Lady Liadrin, confronted with the truth of what her blood knights had done to Muru, was forced to reckon with the moral cost of their actions. The being they had drained and exploited had not been an enemy, but an ally, one who had allowed himself to be captured precisely so that this moment of redemption could occur. The realization struck Liadrin with the force of revelation. She had built her entire philosophy on the idea that the light had abandoned her people, but the truth was far more complex. The light, through Muuru's sacrifice, had been working toward the blood, elves' salvation, even as they believed themselves forsaken. Liadrin traveled to Shatrath City and sought forgiveness from Adal for the crimes her order had committed against his fellow Naaru. The journey was not easy, for she knew that she had no right to expect mercy. The Blood Knights had tortured a being of pure light for months, had treated him as nothing more than a power source, had ignored every sign that what they were doing was wrong. Yet Adal, in his characteristic grace, offered that forgiveness without hesitation. The Naaru's response to Liadrin's confession was remarkable. Rather than condemning her, Adal acknowledged the suffering that had driven the Blood Elves to their actions. He recognized that desperation could lead good people to do terrible things, and he offered the Blood Knights a path forward rather than dwelling on the past. The light, Adal explained, was not a force that held grudges. It welcomed all who sought it sincerely, regardless of what they had done before. Many Blood Knights followed Liadrin's example, joining the Shattered Sun offensive and fighting alongside the forces of Azeroth to stop Kil'jaeden's summoning. These former exploiters of the Naaru became some of the most dedicated warriors in the battle for the Sunwell, their guilt transformed into determination to make amends for what they had done. Some fell in battle, dying in defense of the very font that Muuru's spark had restored. Their deaths were seen by many as acts of redemption, the final sacrifice of those who sought to balance the scales. The transformation of the Blood Knights was not instantaneous or universal. Some members of the Order refused to accept that what they had done was wrong, continuing to believe that they had been justified in taking what they needed to survive. These holdouts gradually drifted away from the Order, unable to reconcile themselves with the new philosophy that Liadrin was promoting. But the core of the Blood Knights embraced the change, becoming genuine paladins who served the light willingly rather than taking it by force. Muuru's sacrifice had achieved what he had foreseen, the redemption of those who had wronged him. The Blood Elves, who had once been among the light's greatest enemies, became some of its most devoted champions. This transformation proved that even the most grievous sins could be forgiven, that even those who had strayed furthest from the light's path could find their way back. Muuru's legacy was not just the restored Sunwell, but the renewed faith of an entire people. The third Naaru who had come to Outland aboard Tempest Keep was Oros, a being whose fate was bound to that of the draenei who had fled Argus. While Adal established himself in Shatrath and Muuru was captured by the Blood Elves, Oros pursued a different path. When the draenei discovered a vessel called the Exodar that could carry them to Azeroth, Oros chose to accompany them on their journey. He understood that the draenei's future lay not in the shattered remnant of Draenor, but in the world that Azeroth had become, a world that would need the light's guidance in the dark times to come. Oros took up residence in the heart of the Exodar, in a chamber that became known as the seat of the Naaru. This position was both symbolic and practical. Symbolically, Oros's presence at the center of the vessel affirmed the Naaru's continued commitment to guiding and protecting the draenei. Practically, his radiance powered many of the Exodar's systems, providing the energy needed for the dimensional crossing that would carry them to Azeroth. The Exodar was itself a remarkable vessel, a satellite structure of Tempest Keep that had been modified for dimensional travel. It was massive, capable of carrying thousands of draenei refugees, along with their possessions, their libraries, and their sacred artifacts. The vessel represented hope for a people who had spent 25,000 years running, a chance to finally find a permanent home where they could live in peace. The interior of the xe'ra was designed to provide all the necessities that the draenei would need during their journey and after their arrival. Vast crystal chambers served as living quarters, their walls resonating with holy energy that kept the inhabitants healthy and comfortable. Libraries preserved the accumulated wisdom of generations, manuscripts, and crystals containing knowledge that stretched back to the days before the flight from Argus. Gardens grew food through a combination of holy magic and advanced technology, ensuring that the draenei would never go hungry. The engineering marvels that powered the xe'ra were beyond mortal comprehension. The vessel could fold space around itself, traveling distances and moments that would take conventional ships thousands of years to cross. Its defensive systems could repel demonic attacks, and its sensors could detect Legion ships across vast stretches of the twisting nether. All of these systems drew upon Orus's power, channeling the Naaru's holy energy through crystalline conduits that ran throughout the ship. The navigation systems were keyed to Orus's consciousness, allowing the Naaru to guide the vessel with a thought. He could sense Azeroth across the vastness of space, could feel the world's unique signature calling to him through the void. The journey was not a random flight, but a deliberate pilgrimage to a world that Oros had been aware of for millennia. He knew that Azeroth was special, that it harbored a world soul of tremendous potential, and he believed that the draenei's future was intertwined with the fate of that nascent titan. The decision to go to Azeroth had not been made lightly. The world was known to the Naaru, but it was also known to the Burning Legion. By bringing the draenei there, Oros knew that he might be drawing the Legion's attention to yet another world. But he also believed that Azeroth represented the best chance for the draenei to finally stop running, to stand and fight alongside allies who might help them turn the tide against their ancient enemies. Prophet Velen chose to lead this expedition himself, seeing in the journey to Azeroth the fulfillment of visions he had received decades before. He had glimpsed a world under siege by the Burning Legion, a world that would need the draenei's strength and the Naaru's wisdom to survive. By traveling to Azeroth, the draenei would not be fleeing from the conflict, but positioning themselves to play a crucial role in it. Oros shared this vision, understanding that the light had purposes for the draenei that extended far beyond their own survival. The journey to Azeroth was not without complications. Blood Elf saboteurs had damaged the xe'ra's engines before its departure, and the vessel crash-landed on the Azure Mist Isles off the coast of Kalimdor. Despite this rough arrival, the draenei established themselves on Azeroth, and Oros remained with them, watching over their new home from his position in the xe'ra's core. Oros was not just any Naaru. He was the last of the prime Naaru xe'ra's line, a descendant of the eldest and most powerful Naaru ever to exist. This lineage made him uniquely important, for only Naaru born of xe'ra could unlock the knowledge contained within certain artifacts of tremendous significance. Oros was, in a sense, a key, a being whose very existence gave access to secrets that would otherwise remain forever hidden. The importance of Oros became clear during the third invasion of the Burning Legion. xe'ra, sensing that the final battle against the demons was approaching, had sent her core, known as Light's Heart, to Azeroth. This artifact contained wisdom crucial to the battle against the Legion, but that wisdom was locked away, accessible only to Naaru of xe'ra's lineage. Oros was the last such Naaru still living, which meant that he alone could unlock Light's Heart and reveal its secrets. The Burning Legion understood this as well. Kil'jaeden, orchestrating the invasion from the twisting nether, knew that Light's Heart could tip the balance of the war. He ordered an attack on the Exodar, not to conquer the draenei, but to destroy Oros before the Naaru could unlock the artifact's secrets. The assault was led by High General Rakish, one of the Legion's most powerful commanders. What made this attack particularly cruel was the identity of the attacker. Rakish was not simply a demon lord. He was Prophet Velen's son, the child who had been kidnapped by Kil'jaeden millennia ago during the flight from Argus. The young Eridar had been subjected to unspeakable tortures by the demonic Inquisition, his mind broken and remade into a weapon to be used against his own father. Kil'jaeden had waited thousands of years for this moment, savoring the pain that he knew Velen would feel when he faced his own corrupted child. The battle for the Exodar was fierce and costly. Velen and the champions of Azeroth fought to defend the vessel and its Naaru guardian, but the Legion's forces were overwhelming. Rakish fought his way to the seat of the Naaru, where Oros awaited. The Naaru could not flee, could not abandon the Exodar and the draenei who depended upon him. He faced Rakish with what courage he possessed, but a Naaru is not built for physical combat against a demon lord. Rakish defeated Oros in single combat, then summoned a Fel Annihilator, a massive demonic war machine, directly on top of the Naaru. The creature crushed Oros upon its arrival, extinguishing the last of xe'ra's lineage. With Oros's death, the seat of the Naaru fell silent, its light extinguished for the first time since the Exodar's creation. The last prime Naaru was gone, and with him died any easy access to the secrets locked within Light's Heart. The battle against Rakish continued even after Oros's destruction. Velen and his allies fought desperately against the demon lord, finally managing to defeat him. But in the moment of Rakish's death, Velen realized the truth. He recognized something in the dying demon's eyes, some echo of the child he had lost so long ago. The revelation struck Velen like a physical blow. He tried to stop his allies from delivering the final strike, crying out that Rakish was his son, but it was too late. Rakish died in Velen's arms, the prophet's sorrow matching the cruelty of Kil'jaeden's design. In the aftermath of the battle, Velen declared that he was neither prophet nor pawn. The roles that had been assigned to him, by fate or by the Naaru, or by his own choices, no longer defined him. He announced that the draenei were returning home, to Argus itself, to finally confront the demons who had hunted them for 25,000 years. The death of Oros and the revelation of Rakish's true identity had stripped away whatever caution Velen had once possessed. The time for running was over. The artifact known as Light's Heart was central to xe'ra's plans for the final defeat of the Burning Legion. This crystalline object, pulsing with holy energy, was the sentience core of the prime Naaru herself. It was not merely a vessel for storing information, but an extension of xe'ra's own consciousness, capable of communicating and acting independently, even when separated from her physical form by vast distances. Within Light's heart was locked wisdom that xe'ra had gathered over countless millennia, knowledge that she believed would be crucial to ending the war against the demons once and for all. This wisdom included insights into the nature of the light and the void, strategies that had proven effective against demonic forces, and most importantly, the prophecy of the child of light and shadow. xe'ra had devoted centuries to understanding this prophecy, and she believed that its fulfillment would bring about the final victory that had eluded the army of the light for so long. When she sent Light's heart to Azeroth, she was sending a part of herself, entrusting her most precious secrets to the heroes who would carry them into battle. The artifact fell from the sky above the Broken Isles, a beacon of hope in a world that was once again facing demonic invasion. Adventurers discovered Light's heart and brought it to their class order halls, where it began to communicate with them, revealing fragments of the knowledge it contained. Light's heart spoke of many things: the history of the Naaru, the nature of the cosmic conflict between light and void, and the role that Illidan's Stormrage was destined to play in the final battle. But the artifact could not reveal everything it knew, for its deepest secrets were locked behind barriers that only a Naaru of xe'ra's lineage could open. This limitation was by design, a safeguard to ensure that the most sensitive information would not fall into the wrong hands. The connection between Light's heart and Illidan's Stormrage was unexpected and deeply significant. xe'ra had observed the demon hunter across the ages, watching his transformation from a night elf who craved power into something far stranger and more dangerous. She had seen him consume the frail energies of demons, seen him blind himself to gain new sight, seen him commit acts that others viewed as monstrous in pursuit of his goal of destroying the Legion. Where others saw a traitor and a monster, xe'ra saw something else, a child of light and shadow, a being who embodied the duality that even the Naaru carried within themselves. xe'ra became convinced that Illidan was the subject of an ancient prophecy, a chosen one who was destined to end the age of demons. She believed that his fell-touched nature and his connection to darkness were not obstacles to his destiny, but essential components of it. Only someone who had walked in both light and shadow, who had experienced the worst of both cosmic forces, could bring the final victory that the forces of light had sought for so long. Illidan was the champion she had been waiting for since the dawn of creation. But there was a complication. Illidan was dead, or at least his body was lifeless. His soul had been separated from his physical form during his apparent death at the Black Temple, cast into the realm of Helheim by forces that remained unclear. Without his soul, Illidan's body was merely an empty vessel, powerful but purposeless. Worse, the demon lord Gul'dan had obtained Illidan's body and was planning to use it as a host for Sargeras himself. If the fallen titan's soul were to possess Illidan's demon-touched form, the consequences for Azeroth and the entire universe would be catastrophic. Light's heart had been designed to serve as the vessel for Illidan's rebirth. xe'ra had foreseen the threat that Gul'dan posed and had prepared a means of countering it. The artifact could contain and protect Illidan's soul until the proper moment came to restore it to his body. But first, that soul had to be recovered from wherever it had been imprisoned. The heroes of Azeroth, guided by Khadgar and the knowledge contained within Light's heart, embarked on a quest to retrieve Illidan's soul. Their journey took them through echoes of Illidan's past, visions that Light's heart projected to show them who the demon hunter truly was. They witnessed his birth, which Light's heart described as an auspicious start to a life of tragedy. They saw his struggles and his choices, his moments of heroism and his acts of darkness. Through these visions, they came to understand that Illidan was neither hero nor villain, but something more complex, a being driven by purpose beyond conventional morality. The search for Illidan's soul led eventually to Helheim, the realm of the Valkyr queen Helya. It appeared that Gul'dan had struck a bargain with Helya, trading Illidan's soul for some benefit that the warlock desired. The heroes journeyed to this dark realm and confronted its mistress, eventually recovering the soul that had been imprisoned there. They placed Illidan's soul within Light's heart, where it would be safe until the time came for restoration. That time came during the assault on the Nighthold, where Gul'dan was making his final preparations to summon Sargeras into Illidan's body. As the heroes fought through the fortress, Khadgar prepared for the moment when intervention would be possible. When Gul'dan began his ritual, Khadgar channeled his power through Light's heart, sending beams of holy, fell, arcane, and shadow energy into Illidan's body. The soul that had been preserved within the artifact was restored to its physical vessel, and Illidan's storm rage awakened. The newly restored Illidan wasted no time in confronting Gul'dan. The battle between them was fierce, but brief, for Illidan's power had only grown during his time in Helheim. He struck down the orc warlock who had tormented so many worlds, ending Gul'dan's threat forever. Then Illidan turned to face the future, aware that the war against the Legion was far from over. The forces of Azeroth had won a great victory, but the final battle still lay ahead. The resurrection of Illidan's storm rage through Light's heart demonstrated the remarkable capabilities that the Naaru had developed over their long existence. The preservation of a soul across dimensional barriers, its protection from corruption, and its eventual restoration to its body were feats that even the most powerful mortal mages would struggle to replicate. Light's heart had served its purpose perfectly, exactly as xe'ra had designed it to do. Yet the resurrection also revealed the limitations of Naaru foresight. xe'ra had correctly predicted many things: that Illidan's body would be in danger, that his soul would need to be preserved, that the forces of Azeroth would need his power to defeat the Legion. But she had failed to predict Illidan's reaction to her attempts to transform him, had failed to understand that the very qualities that made him the child of light and shadow also made him utterly unwilling to have his nature changed by another's decree. The class order halls that received Light's heart during the invasion became unexpected repositories of Naaru wisdom. The artifact shared knowledge with the champions who bore it, teaching them about the cosmic conflict between light and void, about the history of the army of the light, about the nature of the beings they would face on Argus. This knowledge proved invaluable in the battles to come, helping the heroes of Azeroth understand what they were fighting for and what they were fighting against. The destruction of Light's heart came eventually, when its purpose was fulfilled and its energy expended in the service of its mission. The artifact had been a part of xe'ra herself, and its dissolution was mourned by those who had carried it. But its sacrifice was not in vain, for without Light's heart, Illidan could not have been restored, and without Illidan, the war against the Legion might have ended very differently. xe'ra had waited millennia for the moment when she would finally meet the child of light and shadow whose destiny she had foreseen. When Illidan was restored and the forces of Azeroth prepared to journey to Argus, the Prime Naaru saw her opportunity. She would meet the champion she had observed from afar, speak to him directly, and help him fulfill the prophecy that she believed would save the universe. The encounter between xe'ra and Illidan did not go as the Naaru had anticipated. When Illidan was brought before xe'ra aboard the Vindicar, the Prime Naaru spoke of destiny and purpose. She told Illidan that he was the Chosen One, a hero of the light prophesied to end the age of demons. She revealed the vision she had seen, a future in which Illidan had been transformed into a champion of the light, leading an army against the creatures of the void that would threaten the universe after the Legion's defeat. She offered Illidan the power to become what she believed he was meant to be, to fulfill the destiny that had been written for him since before his birth. Illidan refused. The demon hunter had spent his entire existence fighting against those who sought to control him. He had been imprisoned for 10,000 years by his own people for crimes they did not understand. He had been hunted by both Alliance and Horde, labeled a traitor and a monster by those who could not comprehend his methods. He had consumed Fel energy and sacrificed everything he valued in pursuit of his goal, and he had done it all on his own terms. No prophecy, no Naaru, no force in the universe was going to tell him who he was meant to be. xe'ra was not prepared for rejection. She had watched Illidan for thousands of years, had seen the suffering and struggle that had shaped him, had believed with absolute certainty that she understood his destiny better than he did himself. So many had died, so many worlds had burned, all leading to this moment. If Illidan was prophesied to destroy the Legion, xe'ra would see this promised future fulfilled, no matter the cost. The Prime Naaru bound Illidan in chains of light, holding him immobile while she attempted to force upon him the transformation that he had refused. Holy energy poured into the demon hunter, searing away the Fel that had become part of his very being, seeking to remake him into the champion of light that xe'ra believed he was meant to be. For a moment, it seemed that Illidan would be consumed by the light, his identity erased and replaced with whatever xe'ra deemed appropriate. But Illidan's storm rage had defied greater powers than any Naaru. With a surge of will that surprised even those who knew him best, he broke free of xe'ra's chains. Stating that his destiny was his own to decide, Illidan struck at the Prime Naaru with the Fel power that xe'ra had sought to purge from him. The attack shattered xe'ra's crystalline form, ending the existence of one of the oldest and most powerful beings in the cosmos. The witnesses to this act were horrified. Turalyon, who had served xe'ra and the army of the light for 1,000 years, cried out that Illidan had doomed them all. He called Illidan betrayer and attempted to strike him down with the great royal sword, the weapon that symbolized his authority as High Exarch of the Army of the Light. But Illidan caught Turalyon's blow with his bare hand, letting the blade cut into his palm while Fel blood dripped down his arm. Illidan's response to Turalyon was pointed. He told the paladin that his faith had blinded him, that there was no chosen one, that they could only save themselves. The prophecy that xe'ra had believed in with such certainty was nothing more than her own projection, her attempt to control events that were beyond any being's ability to determine. The future was not written in stone, but forged by the choices of those who lived it. The death of xe'ra was controversial among the forces fighting the Legion. Some viewed Illidan's action as murder, the destruction of a benevolent being who had only sought to help him. Others saw it as self-defense, the justifiable response to an assault on his very identity. The truth, as always, was more complex than either interpretation allowed. xe'ra had genuinely believed that she was acting for the greater good, but her certainty had led her to violate the fundamental principle of free will that the light supposedly championed. Illidan had defended himself, but in doing so he had destroyed an ancient and irreplaceable being whose intentions, however misguided, had been aimed at saving the universe. The character of xe'ra had been designed specifically to explore this moral complexity. The developers wanted to challenge the assumption that all Naaru were inherently good from the perspective of mortals, to show that even beings of pure light could have goals and methods that conflicted with the interests of those they sought to help. xe'ra believed that she was doing good, but her version of good was not necessarily good for everyone. This nuance added depth to the Naaru as a race, showing that they were individuals with their own personalities and convictions rather than simple paragons of virtue. The aftermath of xe'ra's death had profound effects on the army of the light. For thousands of years, the Prime Naaru had been their spiritual leader, the source of their guidance and the focus of their devotion. With her gone, the Lightforged were forced to find new ways to understand their mission and their purpose. Some turned to Turalyon for leadership, recognizing in him the qualities of faith and determination that xe'ra had cultivated. Others looked to Prophet Velen, whose ancient wisdom and connection to the light made him a natural successor to the Naaru's guidance. The loss of xe'ra also raised questions about the validity of the prophecies she had promoted. If the Prime Naaru could be so wrong about Illidan, could she have been wrong about other things as well? The Army of the Light had built much of its strategy around the prophecies that xe'ra had interpreted, and now those interpretations were cast into doubt. Some argued that the prophecies themselves remained valid, that only xe'ra's understanding of them had been flawed. Others suggested that the entire concept of cosmic destiny might need to be reconsidered. For the Lightforged who had undergone transformation at xe'ra's direction, her death raised even more personal questions. They had given themselves to the light based partly on their faith in her, had trusted her judgment about the path their lives should take. Learning that she could make such catastrophic errors forced many of them to examine whether their own choices had been truly free or had been subtly influenced by a Naaru who saw them as instruments rather than individuals. This introspection was painful but ultimately productive, leading many Lightforged to develop a more mature and independent relationship with the light they served. The story of the Naaru on Argus did not end with xe'ra's death. The journey to Argus had revealed many things about the world. The draenei had fled 25,000 years before. The once beautiful planet had been transformed into a nightmare landscape of fell corruption and demonic industry. The cities that the Eridar had built in the days before Sargeras's coming lay in ruins, their crystalline spires shattered, their streets choked with the detritus of the Legion's war machine. But even in this corrupted wasteland, traces of the light remained. The region of Eridath, once known as Mak'eri, still held echoes of what Argus had been before the fall. Here, in the remnants of what had been the Eridar's greatest city, adventurers discovered evidence of the Naaru who had once walked among the people of this world. Murals depicted the Naaru blessing the Eridar, teaching them about the light, helping them build the civilization that Sargeras would eventually destroy. These images were painful reminders of what had been lost and of the Naaru who had been left behind. Another Naaru had remained on that demon-scarred world for millennia, trapped and suffering in ways that even her fellow Naaru could barely comprehend. Lura had been one of the Naaru who helped the Eridar in the days before Sargeras's corruption, a being of light who had guided and protected them through countless generations. She had been present when the first temples to the light were built on Argus, had blessed the rituals that the Eridar performed in honor of the cosmic forces they revered. The relationship between Lura and the Eridar had been one of mutual respect and affection, a bond that spanned countless centuries. When the draenei fled Argus aboard the Genedar, Lura made a different choice. She could have joined them on their flight, could have added her power to the ship's defenses, and helped guide them across the cosmos. But she understood that someone needed to stay behind, that the fleeing draenei needed time to escape, and that only she could provide that time. Lura stayed behind to hold back the burning legion, to buy time for her charges to escape, knowing that she might never see them again. For 25,000 years, Lura held the line. She was eventually captured by the Eridar who had become Minari, those corrupted servants of the Legion who had once been her friends and allies. Kil Jaden, who never forgot an enemy or forgave a slight, ordered Lura to be imprisoned in the seat of the Triumvirate, the very place where he and Archimond and Velen had once ruled together. It was a cruel irony, a reminder of everything that had been lost when Sargeras came to Argus. The millennia of imprisonment took their toll on Lura. Cut off from the light, surrounded by demonic energy, unable to escape or even communicate with others of her kind, she slowly fell from light to void. Her elegant song of courage and hope became a shadowy dirge of despair. Where she had once radiated warmth and comfort, she now emanated darkness and dread. The transformation was not her fault, any more than a mortal can be blamed for aging. It was simply what happened to Naaru when they were subjected to enough trauma over enough time. The void energies that Lura now embodied attracted the attention of the Shadow Guard, a faction of ethereals who had embraced the void and become creatures of darkness themselves. These void ethereals were drawn to Argus by Lura's power, seeing in her a resource that could advance their own goals. They stormed the seat of the Triumvirate and established a base there, using devices called void harvesters to amplify and direct the darkness that Lura radiated. Their plan was to plunge the entire city of Mak'eri and eventually all of Argus into eternal shadow. The heroes of Azeroth, accompanied by Alleria Windrunner and the mysterious ethereal known as Locust Walker, ventured into the seat of the Triumvirate to stop the Shadow Guard's plan. They fought through waves of void creatures and corrupted ethereals, eventually reaching the chamber where Lura was held. What they found there was tragic. A Naaru, who had once been a symbol of hope, now twisted into something that radiated only despair. Lura was the first Naaru to have proper attack and death animations, a grim acknowledgement that even these beings of light could fall and could be destroyed. The battle against her was difficult, for she retained much of the power she had possessed as a being of light, now channeled through the void rather than the holy energies. When she finally fell, there was no spark remaining, no heart of a Naaru that could be recovered and used to restore the Sunwell or any other sacred site. Lura was simply gone. Her millennia of suffering finally ended. The Locust Walker, who had observed the battle with scholarly interest, noted that it was rare for a Naaru to fall into the void in this way. The few cases he knew of had occurred when mortals were involved, suggesting that it was the actions of others, rather than any natural process, that had caused Lura's transformation. This observation raised troubling questions about the nature of the Naaru's dual existence. Were they truly creatures of both light and void, or were they beings of light who could be corrupted by external forces? The distinction mattered, for it determined whether the Naaru's darkness was an intrinsic part of their nature or a consequence of the cruelty of others. Prophet Velen's response to Lura's death was somber. He mourned the loss of one who had sacrificed everything to protect his people, acknowledging that her suffering had lasted far longer than any being should be forced to endure. At the same time, he expressed relief that Lura had finally found peace, even if that peace came through destruction. The Naaru who had stayed behind to hold the line had paid the ultimate price for her courage, but her sacrifice had not been in vain. The draenei she had protected had survived, had flourished on other worlds, and had finally returned to Argus to finish the fight she had begun. The return to Argus brought closure for many draenei who had spent millennia wondering about the fate of their homeworld. They walked through the ruins of cities their ancestors had built, touched the stones of temples where the Naaru had once held court, wept for the beauty that had been destroyed when Sargeras corrupted their world. The Naaru who had protected Argus in the days before the corruption were remembered in the prayers and ceremonies that the draenei performed as they reclaimed what remained of their heritage. The final defeat of the Legion on Argus was, itself, a testament to the Naaru's influence. The forces that assembled to confront Sargeras included the Army of the Light, the light-forged draenei who had been transformed by xe'ra's power, and the warriors of Azeroth who had been guided by Adal and inspired by Muru's sacrifice. Every faction that contributed to the victory owed something to the Naaru, whether through direct guidance, spiritual transformation, or the example of courage that the Naaru had set across millennia. Illidan Stormrage played the final role in the confrontation with Sargeras, using the power of the Sargerite keystone to create a rift through which the Pantheon could imprison the fallen Titan. As Illidan remained behind to serve as the jailer of Sargeras, the forces of Azeroth returned home with the knowledge that the Legion's threat had finally ended. The Naaru's dream of a universe freed from the burning Legion had been realized, though not in the way that xe'ra had envisioned. The Vindicar, the vessel that had carried the forces of Azeroth to Argus, returned to orbit above the world it had helped save. This ship, built with Naaru technology and powered by systems that the Naaru had designed, remained as a permanent reminder of the alliance between mortals and the beings of light. Draenei continued to maintain the Vindicar, honoring the legacy of those who had made its creation possible. In the aftermath of Argus, the draenei have faced the task of rebuilding not just their physical structures, but their spiritual relationship with the Naaru. The deaths of so many Naaru, the revelations about xe'ra's actions, and the complex emotions stirred by returning to their corrupted homeworld have all required processing and integration. The draenei's faith in the light remains strong, but it has been tempered by the recognition that even the Naaru can be fallible, that even beings of pure radiance can make choices that cause harm. The legacy of the Naaru extends far beyond the individual stories of those who have lived and died across the millennia. These beings of light have shaped the history of countless worlds, guided the development of numerous civilizations, and stood as beacons of hope against the darkness that eternally threatens to consume the cosmos. Their influence on Azeroth alone has been profound, from the salvation of the draenei to the restoration of the Sunwell to the final defeat of the Burning Legion. The Naaru's influence on mortal theology cannot be overstated. Before encountering the Naaru, many races had vague concepts of light as a positive force, associations with warmth and growth and safety. The Naaru transformed these instinctive associations into a coherent spiritual framework. The draenei's entire religious tradition was shaped by Naaru teachings, their understanding of the cosmos, their rituals and prayers, their very concept of what it meant to live a righteous life. The Blood Elves, after their redemption through Moru's sacrifice, incorporated Naaru teachings into their own spiritual practices, creating a synthesis of arcane and holy traditions that was unique in the known universe. The Church of the Holy Light on Azeroth, while not directly founded by the Naaru, contains echoes of Naaru philosophy. The three virtues, respect, tenacity, and compassion, align closely with values that the Naaru have championed across countless worlds. Some scholars have speculated that the Naaru may have influenced the development of the Church through subtle intervention, perhaps communicating with early human priests in moments of meditation or prayer. Others argue that these similarities are merely coincidental, that the light's truths are universal and would be discovered independently by any race that sought them. The role of the Naaru in the broader cosmic struggle has implications that extend beyond any single world or civilization. They are soldiers in a war that has raged since before time began, a conflict between fundamental forces that shapes the very fabric of reality. Every world the Naaru touch, every race they guide, every sacrifice they make contributes to this larger struggle. The salvation of the draenei was not merely an act of mercy, but a strategic move in the eternal game between light and void. The Naaru understand that the Void Lords represent the ultimate threat to all existence. These entities of absolute darkness seek to corrupt world souls, the nascent titans that slumber within certain planets. If the Void Lords succeeded in corrupting a titan, they would possess a weapon capable of unmaking reality itself. The Naaru's mission, viewed from this cosmic perspective, is to prevent this catastrophe by any means necessary. Every world they protect, every race they guide toward the light, strengthens the forces arrayed against the Void Lord's schemes. The Naaru teach by example as much as by word. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the greater good has inspired mortals across the universe to reach for something higher than mere survival. Muru's acceptance of his fate in Silvermoon, knowing that his suffering would lead to the redemption of the Blood Elves, exemplifies this selfless nature. Lura's decision to stay behind on Argus, holding back the Legion while her people escaped, demonstrates the same principle. The Naaru do not ask others to make sacrifices that they themselves are unwilling to make. Yet the Naaru are not perfect, and their story would be incomplete without acknowledging their flaws. Xe'ra's attempt to force her vision of destiny upon Illidan revealed that even beings of light can fall prey to the conviction that they know best. Her certainty that the universe had predetermined a specific role for the demon hunter led her to violate his free will, to attempt to remake him in an image he had not chosen. This act of arrogance cost Xe'ra her life and complicated the relationship between the Naaru and the mortal races they had long sought to guide. The duality of the Naaru's nature, their capacity for both light and void, raises profound questions about the nature of good and evil. Dor, speaking while in his void state, acknowledged that without the void, the light could not exist. This statement suggests a cosmic balance, a yin and yang of existence, in which neither force can be completely eliminated without destroying the other. The Naaru, who embody both extremes within their crystalline forms, are living proof of this interconnection. They are not simply soldiers of the light, but bridges between opposing forces, beings who understand the necessity of balance, even as they champion one side of the eternal conflict. The Naaru's relationship with mortal races has been characterized by both tremendous gifts and painful lessons. The draenei owe their very survival to the Naaru's intervention, their 25,000-year flight from the Legion, made possible only by Kur's answer to Velen's prayer. The Blood Elves found redemption through the sacrifice of Muru, his dying spark purifying the Sunwell and offering them a path back to the light. Even the orcs, who never worshipped the Naaru directly, were influenced by Kuri's presence in Oshugun, their ancestral traditions shaped by the Naaru's subtle guidance. But the Naaru have also brought suffering, sometimes unintentionally. The void energies of Kuri consumed the souls of orcish ancestors who gathered around Oshugun, a tragedy that Kur could observe, but not prevent. The void state of Dore drew the spirits of dead draenei to Auchindoun, trapping them in a place where they slowly faded rather than finding peace. The presence of Kara, the dark star above Shadow Moon Valley, introduced the orcs to void magic, power that would eventually be twisted to dark purposes by those who served the Legion. The Naaru's dual nature meant that their very existence could be dangerous to those around them, a fact that they acknowledged but could not change. Adal remains in Shatrath City, even now, a beacon of light in a world that has been shattered and reformed multiple times since the events of the Burning Crusade. He continues to welcome all who seek shelter beneath his radiance, maintaining the peace that he established when he first arrived on Outland. The Shatar endures as well, a faction dedicated to defending the weak and opposing the forces of darkness wherever they arise. Adal's gentle wisdom has guided generations of adventurers, his telepathic counsel offering comfort and direction to those who seek it. The destruction of Xe'ra and the deaths of Oros and Lura have significantly diminished the Naaru's presence in the universe. The Prime Naaru, those ancient beings who were forged during the great ordering of the cosmos, are largely gone now, their wisdom and power lost forever. New Naaru may still emerge from the clouds of light that form in the great dark beyond, but these younger beings lack the accumulated experience of their predecessors. The loss of the elders represents an irreplaceable reduction in the forces of light's capability to resist the darkness. Yet hope remains, as it always does where the Naaru are concerned. Kuyure, despite his suffering in Oshugun, was nearly restored to his light-filled state when last observed in certain timelines. Xe'ra, the dark star, was successfully purified by the alternate version of Velen, her void energies converted back to light through the prophet's sacrifice. These examples suggest that even Naaru, who have fallen into darkness, can return to what they once were, given enough time and the proper circumstances. The cycle continues, light giving way to void, and void eventually yielding to light once more. The implications of this cycle extend beyond the Naaru themselves. If beings of pure light can fall into void and yet return to what they were, what does this say about the nature of the cosmic struggle? Perhaps the conflict between light and void is not meant to have a winner, is not meant to end in the complete triumph of one side over the other. Perhaps the cycle of light and void, of hope and despair, is itself the purpose of existence, a dance of opposing forces that gives meaning to the universe. The Naaru seem to understand this possibility on some level. Their philosophy embraces the reality of the void, acknowledging its necessity even while opposing its corruption. They do not seek to eliminate the void entirely, for they understand that such elimination would also eliminate the light. Without darkness, light has no meaning. Without despair, hope loses its power to inspire. The Naaru fight against the void's corruption, not because they believe the void should not exist, but because they believe the void's influence must be balanced by the light's embrace. This nuanced understanding of cosmic balance sets the Naaru apart from many other champions of light. The zealots who follow the light blindly often fail to grasp this truth, believing that the void must be eradicated completely. The Naaru know better. They understand that the universe requires both forces, that the tension between them is what drives creation forward. Their goal is not victory, but equilibrium, a state in which neither force dominates and both contribute to the ongoing work of existence. Whether this equilibrium will ever be achieved remains one of the great questions of the cosmos. The Void Lords continue to scheme, seeking to tip the balance permanently in their favor. The forces of the light continue to resist, knowing that the Void's triumph would mean the end of all meaningful existence. The Naaru will continue to play their role in this eternal drama, sacrificing themselves when necessary and guiding mortals when possible, working always toward a future they may never live to see. The story of the Naaru is ultimately a story about faith, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle between hope and despair. These beings have dedicated their existence to the service of something greater than themselves, fighting for millennia in a war that has no end in sight. They have lost countless battles, watched worlds burn, seen civilizations crumble to dust. Yet they continue, pressing forward against the darkness because they believe that their cause is just and that the light will ultimately prevail. Whether that belief is justified, remains to be seen. The universe is vast and full of terrors that even the Naaru have not fully comprehended. The Void Lords, those entities of absolute darkness who created the old gods and seek the destruction of all reality, still lurk in the spaces beyond creation. The struggle between light and void that began before time itself shows no signs of ending. The Naaru will continue to fight in that struggle, sacrificing themselves as necessary, hoping that their efforts will make a difference in a conflict that may last for eternity. The future of the Naaru remains uncertain, as does the future of all beings in a universe defined by conflict. With the defeat of the Burning Legion and the imprisonment of Sargeras, one great enemy has been neutralized, but another waits in the wings. The Void Lords have not abandoned their schemes. The old gods continue to whisper from their prisons. The corruption that threatens Azeroth's world soul has been checked but not eliminated. The Naaru will have roles to play in the battles to come, though what those roles will be remains to be seen. Some Naaru, like Adal, continue their work among the mortal races, offering guidance and sanctuary to those who seek the light. Others may be pursuing missions that mortals know nothing about, visiting distant worlds, or confronting threats that have not yet reached Azeroth's shores. The Naaru do not share all their plans with the mortal races, understanding that some knowledge is too vast or too dangerous for minds that have not been prepared to receive it. The relationship between the Naaru and the mortal champions who fought alongside them in the war against the Legion has evolved in the aftermath of that conflict. Some warriors maintain close ties to the Naaru, continuing to serve as agents of the light in whatever capacity is required. Others have moved on to other concerns, their debt to the Naaru repaid through their service in battle. The bonds forged in war do not always survive into peacetime, and the Naaru understand this better than most. The question of whether new Prime Naaru will ever emerge to replace those who have fallen remains unanswered. The clouds of light that form in the great dark beyond continue to coalesce, and it is possible that new beings of tremendous power will eventually emerge from them. But the process of Naaru formation takes eons, and the universe may not have that long to wait. The forces of darkness do not rest, and the light must make do with the champions it has. For the mortal races of Azeroth, the Naaru represent both inspiration and warning. They demonstrate what beings of pure light can achieve, the heights of sacrifice and compassion that are possible when one dedicates oneself to a cause greater than personal survival. But they also demonstrate the dangers of certainty, the ways in which even the most benevolent intentions can lead to harm when one believes too strongly in one's own righteousness. The lesson of xe'ra is that even the light can become oppressive when it refuses to acknowledge the validity of other perspectives. The adventurers who have journeyed alongside the Naaru carry these lessons with them as they face new challenges. They have seen the Naaru at their best, sacrificing everything for the sake of others. They have also seen the Naaru at their worst, attempting to force their vision of destiny upon those who wish to chart their own course. These experiences have shaped how mortal champions approach questions of faith and purpose, teaching them that even the most sacred ideals must be questioned and that even the most revered beings can make terrible mistakes. The priests and paladins who serve the light on Azeroth have been particularly affected by the revelations about the Naaru's nature. Many of them had believed that the light was purely good, that its champions were infallible, that following its guidance would always lead to righteous outcomes. The complexity of the Naaru, their capacity for both tremendous good and terrible harm, has forced these faithful servants to reconsider their understanding of what it means to serve the light. Some have emerged from this reconsideration with their faith strengthened, finding that a more nuanced understanding of the light's nature makes their service more meaningful. Others have struggled, unable to reconcile the idealized light they once believed in with the complicated reality they have now encountered. A few have abandoned their faith entirely, unable to serve a power that could produce beings like xe'ra alongside beings like Muru. The Naaru's legacy among Azeroth's faithful is thus mixed, a source of inspiration for some and crisis for others. The draenei, of course, maintain the closest relationship with the Naaru of any race on Azeroth. Their 25,000-year journey alongside these beings of light has shaped every aspect of their culture, their religion, their understanding of the cosmos. The losses they have suffered, particularly the death of Khurs and the transformation of so many Naaru into void creatures, have been deeply traumatic for the draenei people. Yet they continue to honor the Naaru's sacrifice, continue to teach their children about the beings who saved them from extinction, continue to hope that one day they will be reunited with their celestial guardians in a universe finally freed from the shadow of the void. The gift of the Naaru, the racial ability that allows all draenei to heal themselves and others, serves as a constant reminder of what the Naaru have given them. This gift is not merely a magical technique, but a genuine connection to the light that flows through Naaru essence. Every time a draenei activates this ability, they are tapping into the legacy of Kure and Dore and all the Naaru who guided their people across the stars. The healing energy that flows through them carries echoes of the Naaru's radiance, a physical manifestation of the bond that was forged when Curie answered Velen's desperate prayer. Draenei temples on Azeroth contain shrines dedicated to individual Naaru, places where the faithful can offer prayers and meditation in honor of specific beings of light. The Exodar itself, despite the death of Oros, remains a sacred space where the Naaru's presence can still be felt. Draenei priests spend hours in the seat of the Naaru, now dark and silent, remembering what once was and hoping for what might yet be. Some claim to have received visions in that darkened chamber, whispers from the light that speak of renewal and restoration to come. The light-forged draenei who joined the Alliance after the war on Argus brought with them a different perspective on the Naaru. Having served under xe'ra for thousands of years, they understood both the heights of Naaru wisdom and the depths of Naaru error. They have shared their experiences with their Exodar-dwelling kin, helping the draenei as a whole develop a more complete understanding of the beings they have long revered. This exchange of knowledge and perspective has enriched both communities, helping them prepare for whatever challenges the future may bring. Young draenei growing up on Azeroth in the years since the Legion's defeat learn about the Naaru as both historical figures and ongoing spiritual presences. They hear stories of Kure's mercy, of Muru's sacrifice, of Adal's wisdom. They also learn about xe'ra's failure, about the dangers of certainty, about the importance of respecting the choices of others, even when those choices seem wrong. The Naaru's legacy, in all its complexity, is being woven into the education of a new generation, one that will carry these lessons forward into whatever future awaits. The mysteries of the Naaru remain vast, even after everything that mortals have learned about them. We do not know how many Naaru still exist in the great dark beyond, tending to worlds and civilizations that Azeroth's champions have never heard of. We do not know what plans they are making for the future, what strategies they are developing to counter the Void Lord's schemes. We do not know if there are other Prime Naaru out there somewhere, ancient beings who might one day return to the cosmic stage. The Naaru who remain on Azeroth, particularly Adel in Shatrath City, continue their work with the quiet dedication that has characterized their race since the dawn of creation. They do not speak often of their losses, do not dwell publicly on the deaths of xe'ra and Oros and Lura. But those who are sensitive to the light can sometimes feel echoes of grief in the Naaru's telepathic emanations, sorrow for fallen comrades that will take centuries to fully process. The relationship between Azeroth and the Naaru has entered a new phase in the aftermath of the Legion's defeat. The immediate crisis that brought the Naaru to Outland has passed, but the cosmic struggle continues. New threats will emerge, new challenges will arise, and the Naaru will be there to offer guidance and aid to those who seek the light's wisdom. Their role in Azeroth's future is not yet written, but their commitment to the world and its people remains unchanged. As you drift toward sleep, consider the nature of the beings you have just learned about. The Naaru are not gods in the traditional sense, yet they possess many godlike qualities. They are not perfect, yet they strive for ideals that most mortals can only dream of. They are creatures of light who carry darkness within them, living proof that existence itself is defined by the tension between opposing forces. Perhaps there is a lesson in their nature, a reminder that the struggle between hope and despair is not something to be won, but something to be lived. Each day a new opportunity to choose which force will guide your actions. The Naaru would tell you to hold on to hope, even in the darkest of times. They would remind you that the light exists within all things, waiting to be called forth by those who have the courage to seek it. They would assure you that no night, however long, lasts forever, and that dawn always comes to those who endure. These are not just platitudes to the Naaru, but truths they have learned through countless ages of existence, principles they have tested against the worst that the universe can offer. May the light of the Naaru watch over your dreams this night. May you find in sleep the restoration that your body and mind require. And may you wake refreshed, ready to face whatever challenges the new day brings, strengthened by the knowledge that even beings of pure light must struggle against darkness, and that this struggle is what gives meaning to existence. The Naaru have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, have seen stars born and die, have watched as the cosmos itself evolved from the primordial chaos of creation. Through it all, they have held to their purpose, have maintained their commitment to the light's cause, have continued to believe that their efforts matter in a universe that sometimes seems indifferent to all such beliefs. Their persistence is itself a form of faith, a demonstration that hope can survive even when all evidence seems to counsel despair. Perhaps the most important lesson the Naaru offer is simply this, that we are not alone in our struggles. The universe may be vast and cold, filled with forces that do not care about mortal concerns, but somewhere out there, beings of light are working to protect and nurture life wherever they find it. That is the complete story of the Naaru. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe. We cover all of the deep and fascinating lore of World of Warcraft right here on World of Sleepcraft.